Chapter 144. Holding hands, this was a word with many meanings. In the most basic physical sense, it meant that two people's palms were touching. Later on, many meanings were derived from it. Some implied the establishment of a romantic relationship, some implied the alliance of two major powers, and some implied the ambiguity between an unmarried couple. Unfortunately, Luo Ye and Xia Luo were exceptions. I say move a little. How do I move? This position? Then use more strength. Under Xia Luo's urging, Luo Ye finally changed her strength slightly. It changed from pure skin contact to a real couple's hand-holding. Isn't this still ineffective? I already said that the possibility of it being like before is very low. As long as it's possible, we should try. At least it's better than looking for clues aimlessly. Holding Xia Luo's cold and soft hand, Luo Ye's expression didn't change, but she couldn't help but feel a little restless inside. Putting her personality aside, Xia Luo's body was truly exquisite. This kind of perfection didn't only satisfy the visual sense, but also the sense of touch and smell. Her skin was smooth and soft, just like the silk fabric in clothes. If one got close to her, they would smell a natural and gentle fragrance. Standing next to Xia Luo, who was the standard pure and unsullied young mistress, to be honest, it was quite alluring. Luo Ye complained, but her body was honestly enjoying it. On the other hand, Xia Luo was in a different situation. Currently, the young girl was lowering her head and thinking about her next plan. As expected, I still need to have deeper contact with her? Xia Luo recalled the various divination and prophecy spells that she had learned. She couldn't help but admit that the level of two holding hands was too low. In the oldest records, in order to obtain spirit vision, the spellcasters even had to drink the blood of their target. Of course, this method was too primitive and barbaric. Xia Luo firmly rejected it, but she could still do it if it was just a little more intimate. Hug me. What? Hug me. This way, the bloodline fluctuations should be stronger. 2,000 gold coins, hurry up. This, comparing 2,000 gold coins to her own moral integrity, it seemed 2,000 gold coins were more important. Luo Ye, who sold his moral integrity by weight, looked at the young girl who acted like she was doing business. He gritted his teeth and hugged her. Luo Ye wasn't a freeloader, so this time, Xia Luo let out a short scream and fell into the man's arms. Luo Ye, can you not be so rough? Didn't you say to use force? Her body was pressed tightly against the man's shoulder. For the first time since the beginning of the experiment, Charlotte's expression changed. She took 2 deep breaths and tried to suppress her racing heartbeat. And I didn't say it was a surprise attack. You're the boss. Whatever you say is right. Luo Ye, who took the money, loosened his grip and let Xia Luo snuggle in his arms. Luo Ye, who felt the increased temptation, turned his head and avoided the young girl's jade-like eyes. Xia Luo also suppressed her breathing and heartbeat. She tried not to look at Luo Ye's face, which was so close to her. Instead, she looked at her neck. However, the young girl didn't expect that her shyness would lead to an unexpected discovery. Xia Luo stared at Luo Ye's white neck. She was a little puzzled. She remembered that there was a hickey here at noon. Why did it disappear now? Hickeys were actually bleeding under the skin caused by too much suction. Normally, it would take about a week for an ordinary person to recover if they didn't treat it. However, for extraordinaires with strong recovery abilities, it would be gone in about 2 days if they left it alone. It would be even faster for those with a physical body, about a day. However, Luo Ye, or rather the Akat family, was obviously not in this situation. It had only been a few hours since noon, so how did the hickey disappear? Have you treated the neck? Chapter 145. A week later, in the study of the Akat family, Roha looked at the small clock and calculated the time in his heart. It was early in the morning, and the maids who had woken up early were busy. The kitchen staff went out to purchase items and would prepare breakfast in a short while. Luo Ye leaned on the large chair in the study and scanned the books in front of him. He felt like he had taken the college entrance exam in his previous life. Doing the questions until he understood what to do just by looking at the beginning and a few keywords. That was Luo Ye's youth in his previous life, and recently, Luo Ye was like a grandfather returning to his youth. A lot of things happened in this week, the most important of which was the buyout by the capitalist dog Miss Xia Luo. That's right, Xia Luo wanted to buy AI Lizzie for a month for 100,000 gold coins, but this plan was rejected by Luo Ye. In his words, this was AI Lizzie's home, and it was up to AI Lizzie to decide whether she wanted to live here or not. Ever since that night when Luo Ye was forced by Xia Luo to act out a fiancé and fiancé scene of love at first sight, AI Lizzie was completely flustered. When she heard that the original plan had led to Xia Luo throwing the coin of destiny 3 times in a row, AI Lizzie couldn't take it anymore. However, that wasn't the end of it. Afterwards, the two of them even used the letter she found to stimulate the bloodline connection, and the aftermath caused a sensation in the entire mansion. When AI Lizzie heard this, she regretted her actions and hugged her pillow in grievance and began to cry. After knowing each other for 3 years, this was the first time AI Lizzie missed her nemesis, Nuire. Now that Xia Luo had the identity of fiancé, the results of 3 divination, and the bloodline connection, it could be said that she had the upper hand. AI Lizzie was alone and couldn't hold on much longer. Unfortunately, Nuire was cut off at the eastern front line due to communication problems. AI Lizzie couldn't become a friend even if she wanted to. She could only rely on Luo Ye's pampering and stick to her elder brother as much as possible. Elder brother won't marry that woman? He really won't? You're not lying to AI Lizzie, right? I'm really not lying to you. We're currently looking for clues about the Golden Fleet mentioned in the letter. Our current relationship is just a disguise. Luo Ye helplessly explained to AI Lizzie. As a large family, the Sorofia family's strength would definitely increase greatly once they found the curse system and the method of the promotion ceremony. Faced with such a situation, the Austin Empire would definitely do everything possible to suppress them. Therefore, Luo Ye and Xia Luo's investigation was currently under the cover of a marriage contract. Of course, everything was for the sake of caution. In fact, the combination of Luo Ye and Xia Luo couldn't compare to the reputation of the experts and scholars who investigated this matter in the past, so even if it was announced, it might not be taken seriously. However, it was always better to be safe than sorry. Under Luo Ye's persuasion, AI Lizzie understood the importance of this matter. After receiving Luo Ye's guarantee, she suddenly expressed her desire to go to the holy capital. One of the reasons AI Lizzie made this choice was naturally because of the deal Luo Ye mentioned. The other reason was that AI Lizzie discovered that as long as she was around, Xia Luo would take the initiative to get intimate with Luo Ye. On the contrary, the two of them were more normal when she wasn't around. Without a doubt, this was the revenge of Xia Luo who saw through AI Lizzie's intentions. However, the silver-haired girl, as an adopted sister, couldn't do anything in the face of Xia Luo's righteous fiancé. She could only helplessly avoid the battle and yearn to go to the holy capital to find Nuire to discuss this matter in detail. Big brother, you must protect yourself well. Don't fall in love and wait for me to come back. Thinking back to how AI Lizzie rubbed against his chest and said these words while crying, Luo Ye didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He and Xia Luo only had a deal and didn't see eye to eye. How could there be any feelings between them? Sigh, children these days are so young and their minds are filled with love and affection. How impractical. Gold coins, isn't it good? Thinking up to this point, Luo Ye shook his head. He was abnormally satisfied with his life of earning thousands of gold coins every day. However, it had to be said that Luo Ye was still a responsible person. Since he took the money, he had to do it, let alone this much money. Starting from the second day after AI Lizzie left, Luo Ye and Xia Luo began a life similar to a summer camp. Since they slept early, Luo Ye would come to the study at 5 o'clock every day to look for clues. As a girl, Xia Luo would come later, around 6 o'clock. It had to be said that after spending a week together and having a common goal, the two of them already had a certain degree of tacit understanding. There was quite an atmosphere of office colleagues. The black-haired boy looked at the time and entered the tea room. He took 3 spoonfuls of high-quality Qigong tea and poured it into a tea net. After the water boiled for about 3 minutes, he washed the tea and poured it. Then he took out Luo Ya's unique mysterious formula. Hypnosis Spell Resistance Potion Type 3. The third version of the main potion used by Cassie of the Kingdom of Sleep to resist the Dream Demon. Only one drop is needed to wake up the mind and bid farewell to sleep. Chase after these damned monsters and fight. However, for your safety, don't drink too much at once. Price: 300 gold coins. Not bad. This was the good stuff that Luo Ya found in the system store. 300 gold coins wasn't very expensive. The amount was about the size of a small test tube, but it was very durable. Only one drop was enough to make people work efficiently for a day. The price was that they couldn't dream. Honestly, this price was almost the same as nothing. In terms of color and taste, Hypnosis Spell Resistance Potion Type 3 was a reddish-brown color similar to black tea. The taste was very light, almost non-existent. When Luo Ya first saw this item, he thought that it was like black tea concentrate, but after actually using it, he found that it was really refreshing. Moreover, after drinking it, no one would attack him or make him scream. Reading books every day was fine as a hobby, but when it became a rough scanning and browsing, even Luo Ya couldn't bear the burden of reading for a day. It had to be said that manual Baidu wasn't something that anyone could do. After carefully pouring a small drop into the teacup, Luo Ya's black tea was completed. After that, he followed the same formula, but this time, he brewed a type of flower tea exclusive to Akat territory. This was naturally brewed for Xia Lu. As the producer of the top-grade Shigong black tea, Rose's own people drank it so much that they almost vomited. So when Golden Rose accidentally drank Akat territory's specialty flower tea a few days ago, she was very curious. Chapter 146. In Luo Ya's previous life, when he was studying in university, he often went to the library to study under the pressure of failing his subjects. At that time, he was hurt. The library's 3 ultimate methods of killing dogs: holding hands, leaning on shoulders, and whispering. As a single person, Luo Ya was caught off guard. In a trance, the dog's head fell to the ground and barked. But he never thought that one day he would become a member of this group of people. Feeling the smooth and soft touch in his hand, Luo Ya couldn't help but sigh at the difficult working conditions. In order to prevent missing any useful information that might lead to the creation of spirit vision, Luo Ya and Xia Lu had been reading books hand in hand for the past few days. But it was a pity that there wasn't much progress so far. After several fruitless physical contact, Luo Ya and Xia Lu began to shift their attention and focused on investigating the letter. As the content of the letter was too short, the two of them only found 2 entry points after flipping through it a few times. The first was naturally the location in the letter, Twin Horn Harbor. Luo Ya wasn't clear about the location of the Twin Horn Harbor. The only thing he knew was that it wasn't in the territory of Akat territory. After seeing the name of this place, he tried to search for it, but the map collected by the Akat family didn't have this name. In the beginning, Luo Ya thought that it was a problem with the map. In this era, maps weren't something that could be found on the streets like in his previous life. On the contrary, maps were extremely precious strategic items. In this era without high-tech observation methods, map drawing relied on manual labor. This was a highly technical, tiring, and dangerous job. After all, no overlord would be willing to let others know their geographical location and strategic points. If anyone secretly drew a map, they would be caught and tortured. This was because if someone came to your house to inspect the terrain, it basically meant that someone was thinking about you. Even royal geographers with formal authorization had a very difficult job in the various territories. Not to mention the various underhanded tactics of the lords. Even if they did nothing, it would be considered good for ordinary people to finish mapping a piece of land in their lifetime just by going up and down mountains and down rivers. And in Xia, this danger would be magnified once again. That was because there were more than just ferocious beasts in the deep mountains and forests of this region. Many of the mutated animals could not even be stopped by high-level superhumans. Normal geographers would probably die the moment they encountered them. The above reasons eventually led to the shortage of Xia's maps. But don't think that this is the end. Getting the map was just the threshold or the first step. There would be greater challenges waiting for you next. such as distinguishing whether the map was real or fabricated. The geographer's moral integrity was not so good. Just like some islands in the Atlantic Ocean in Luo Ya's previous life, in ancient times, the reason why they were drawn on the map was that the geographer missed his wife when he was drawing the map, so he drew an island for her. Some people simply wanted to be famous. They would fabricate a place and start bragging about it. Anyway, no one would be able to find it. Similar situations existed in Shiya, which led to a very interesting phenomenon. That was, the feudal lords spent money to collect the maps, but when they looked at the names, they would find that they were all drawn in the same area. Then there was the traditional art of guessing. One of us is real. Guess which one is it? This kind of speechless situation was encountered almost every new territory. Fortunately, Akkad territory had a history of thousands of years, so it was very clear what it looked like. However, it was a bit difficult to guess other places. Whether it was the century map of the theocracy or the internal strategic map of the Third War of the Mutated Species, the major regional maps did not indicate this port called Twin Horn Harbor. However, to Luo Ya's surprise, Xia Luot actually answered this question instantly. Twin Horn Harbor is the Cursed Bay. Don't you know? I don't know. Do these two names look like they have anything to do with each other? Luo Ya looked at the brown-haired girl speechlessly. After a long time of hard work, he found out that Twin Horn Harbor was a name unique to the locals of the Cursed Bay. Cursed Gulf. This name was much more famous than Twin Horn Port. At least a lot of people in Akkad City knew about it. The reason was simple. It was close to Cursed Gulf. It was an undeveloped area on the east side of Warren Mountain Range. Of course, the reason why it was undeveloped wasn't because Akkad and Rosetta were lazy, but because of the literal meaning of the name, which was the curse of Cursed Gulf. To put it bluntly, it was the low temperature. The curse of the Cursed Bay was actually the cold. According to records, the temperature in that area was extremely low for some reason. It was somewhat similar to the North Pole in Luo Ya's previous life. It seemed that there was indeed a port with a good terrain, but unfortunately, this port was an eternal frozen port. It was covered in snow all year round. This situation that obviously went against the climate of the nearby area naturally aroused people's curiosity. During the pioneering era, many adventurers rushed into that world of ice and snow, but they often disappeared. There were only a few people who could return. The word curse came from the mouths of the survivors. The adventurers were not stupid. It was impossible for there to be any civilization ruins in this bay, and the benefits they could obtain were very little. After a series of failures, no one was interested in this place anymore. Over time, this untouched bay became the cursed bay in people's mouths. This was Luo Ya's understanding of this remote place in front of his own home. And according to Xia Lot, that place became a difficult project for Sorofia in recent decades. Lo She was founded on commerce, and the port is especially important for commercial activities. The terrain there is a natural good port. Sorofia's ancestors once wanted to develop it as a distribution center for the central part of the continent, but they were unable to solve the problem of low temperature, especially in winter. The temperature there is even unbearable for horses. Xia Luot roughly explained the Sorofia family's resentment towards the Twin Horn port. The two combined the current situation and looked at the letter, and naturally found a clue. According to the letter and the information obtained from the spirit vision, the golden ship led by the Queen arrived at the Twin Horn port in mid-April. The fact that the ship could arrive meant that the Twin Horn port could be passed through normally at that time. It was obviously different from the current situation of the eternal frozen port. The purpose of this letter was to report the arrival date. The recipient was the Akkad family, and the Twin Horn port was not far from Akkad territory. After a comprehensive analysis, Luo Ya and Xia Luot initially thought that there were two possibilities. The first was that the recipient, the Lord, would go to meet them and both sides would meet at the Twin Horn port. The second was that the recipient, the Lord, would wait on the spot and meet the Queens in Akkad territory from April to May. The third was that the Queens did not arrive for some reason, and both sides cancelled the trip, and the letter became invalid. They abandoned the third possibility, which was possible but useless to the two of them. In theory, they should be able to find clues in the historical records. Chapter 147. Young Mistress, what do you think of young Master Luoya? Early in the morning, in Xia Luo's room, the servant girl was combing the girl's hair while asking this question. Hearing Gu Lacey's question, Xia Luo was stunned for a moment before replying the same way she did a few days ago. Of course it's to disguise our relationship as an engaged couple. Didn't I tell you before? Disguise? The black-haired servant girl muttered to herself after hearing Xia Luo's answer. She couldn't help but feel that something was amiss. It had been more than a week since she came to the Akot family. As Xia Luo's personal servant girl, Gu Lacey discovered a very serious problem. As time went by, the frequency of young mistress mentioning a certain person's name was getting higher and higher. Just like now. That guy Luo Ya's ancient Austin language is beyond imagination. He's obviously a member of the theocracy, so why would he learn that kind of language? Yesterday's clothes were not bad, but the style was a little old-fashioned. If I were to tuck in the shoulders, although I'm not sure, his supernatural power doesn't seem to be weak. He's hemming and hawing and isn't willing to talk about the details. So, young mistress, why do you want to know the details? Aren't you in a cooperative relationship? Why do you want to know so much about him? Gu Lacey frowned in confusion. After learning that Luo Ya's information was the result of being misled, Gu Lacey was extremely vigilant against the servants of the Akot family. At the same time, she began to re-evaluate this engagement. Although the beginning between young mistress and Luo Ya wasn't perfect due to a freak combination of factors, it had to be said that the current Luo Ya could indeed cause Xia Luo's mood to fluctuate. The furthest distance in love was never discussed, but indifference and indifference. This was what Gu Lacey was most worried about Xia Luo. Xia Luo was naturally a little cold to others. This was the shadow of her childhood. She didn't rely on others too much and didn't trust others too much. Unless someone really walked into her heart, no matter how good their relationship was, it was just superficial. At that time, Gu Lacey conservatively estimated that it would take a few months to break through this ice layer, but the reality was beyond her imagination. The first time they met, Luo Ya had a bad impression of Xia Luo, but recently, as they got to know each other better, the situation seemed to be turning around. This shouldn't be a deliberate trick, right? Gu Lacey, who had been fooled by the Akot family's maid group, was a little traumatized. He asked Xia Luo how she felt, but he didn't expect the girl to laugh after listening to him. I will like that guy. Gu Lacey, what are you thinking? How is that possible? Facing the worried maid, Xia Luo looked as calm as MBTI after hearing a joke. You heard what I said before, right? That guy is the complete opposite of us Rose nobles. He has little understanding of art and music, and his fashion sense can't keep up with my footsteps. Moreover, he isn't romantic at all. If this was in Rose nobles, any of the nobles would have already written a love poem. Gu Lacey listened to Xia Luo's words and wanted to say something, but he hesitated. What about opposite interests and hobbies? After all, it depends on how one interprets it. Not good at art and music? Then wouldn't they complement each other? As for love poems, aren't those things a failure? In short, that guy and I are just an equivalent exchange. It's a transaction under the cover of a marriage contract. Xia Luo crossed her arms and judged the relationship between the two. Gu Lacey looked at Miss in the mirror with a complicated expression. He suddenly remembered the 3 fate divinations that had been forgotten. Those, were they really not new at all? The black-haired maid shook her head slightly. She didn't know the answer to this question and could only silently pray for Miss Good Luck. Why did you suddenly fall asleep today? In the study, the reddish-brown-haired girl looked at the black-haired boy who was sleeping on the table next to her. She blinked her eyes in confusion. Today was the 10th day of the two's intensive training of browsing records. After half a month of getting along, Xia Luo had basically gotten used to the life in the Akot family. To a large extent, she understood the fiancé beside her. Therefore, she had the current doubts in her heart. In her impression, Luo Ya wasn't as vigorous as a dragon or fierce as a tiger, but at least he was full of energy. At least in these 10 days of boring browsing, although he would sometimes be absent-minded, he never showed any signs of fatigue. Xia Luot honestly admired him on this point. Don't look at how Miss came punctually every day to search for information with Luoya. Both of them worked until 9 p.m. before going to bed. In fact, Xia Luot had her own means to replenish her energy. Gu Lacey, Xia Luot's personal maid, was a master of Source Level 3. Not to mention her combat skills, she had learned a lot of daily curses. One of them was Gu Lacey's unique, deep sleep, which was a consummate recovery technique. Deep sleep allowed Xia Luot to rest for a night as much as others would rest for a few days. This guaranteed that she would wake up every morning feeling refreshed and healthy. Moreover, there were almost no side effects. This recovery technique could be said to be the foundation of Xia Luot's many years of high-intensity work. Chapter 148. What's going on now? In the study, Luoya woke up after 2 hours of sleep. He looked at the blanket on his body, then turned his head to look at the girl beside him. His gaze shifted back and forth between the two. This is yours? Thank you. I'm not in a good state today, so I accidentally fell asleep. Luoya raised the blanket and thanked her. Xia Luot nodded slightly. The young man observed the girl beside him, and suddenly felt that she seemed to be angry. Although her face was calm and she didn't reprimand him, Xia Luot's overall temperament had changed a little. Her usual noble and unapproachable aura had become somewhat cold and sharp. Luoya had experience with such changes, and had even studied them before. He believed that this was a manifestation of an extraordinary mood affecting the fluctuations of curse power. The black-haired young man gently placed the blanket to the side. He was no longer in the mood to think about the connection between the girl's temperament change and her curse power. Compared to that, he was more interested in finding out what was going on. Is she angry because I slacked off? That can't be. The most serious words were greedy, shameless, childish, and so on. Luoya, who was used to Zhu En's trolls in his previous life, didn't feel any pain at all. In fact, he even thought that Xia Luot was quite cute when she squeezed out these words with a red face. Xia Luot was a dog rich, and not the kind of rich person who worked as a concubine, but the kind who spent money every day. How could someone like her be angry because he slacked off for a while? Wasn't this the same as how a Saudi prince was angry at a roadside oiler for wasting gas? How is this possible? What's going on? The black-haired young man glanced at the girl from the corner of his eyes, but didn't say anything. He could only work on the side. After this restless atmosphere lasted for 2 minutes, the girl suddenly spoke. Why did you fall asleep today? I'm not in a good state. Not in a good state today? What about a few days ago? A few days ago? I was all right. Hey, is that so? Xia Luot smiled with a hint of anger. She stared into Luoya's eyes and asked, Did you drink some kind of medicine? Yes, but my potion is still okay. Leave it to me tomorrow. Leave it to me tomorrow. You're not allowed to drink anymore. Luoya looked at Xia Luot's serious expression. He finally understood why she was angry, but then he was puzzled. This should be because she was worried about me? What? Luoya didn't understand what was wrong with Xia Luot's brain. Why did she want him to drink Red Bull? But he knew that Xia Luot probably treated his medicine as harmful. Actually, that medicine of mine is all right. The side effects aren't that big. That won't do. Many drugs with minor side effects are addictive. It's better to use drugs with strong side effects. Xia Luot glanced at the pile of books that had been piled up over the past few days and warned her sternly, there are so many things. Take your time to find them. If you continue to use the potions recklessly, I will have no choice but to write to Uncle Kadia. No, I'll give it to you tomorrow. Luoya hurriedly waved his hand when he heard that Xia Luot wanted to report to his parents. Because of the Golden Partners incident, Kadia strictly forbade Luoya from drinking any potions. If he wrote to his parents, Kadia might even ask for leave and come back to scold him. Chapter 149. The Austin Empire. In the vast Rumen forest, the observation platform at the edge of the mountain peak was already filled with people. Countless luxurious carriages and precious horses were gathered in front of the palace complex that had been built with a huge amount of money. Couples were holding hands as they squeezed out and walked into the main hall. This was the most famous dating spot in the Austrian Empire, the Roman Palace complex. It was famous across the continent. Every February, countless couples would gather in this palace that had hundreds of years of history, overlooking the thousands of miles of mountains and rivers of the Roman forest, as well as the butterflies. Indeed, this was a sacred place to see butterflies. The weather in the Roman forest was hot and rainy, and there was no snow all year round. Every February, a butterfly called the luminous butterfly would lay eggs here, and after a few months of incubation, it would transform into a beautiful queen of the night. This kind of mythical butterfly was just like its name. It would emit light in the dark, and the brightest one would be the leader of the group. It was definitely pleasing to the eye, but the reason why butterflies and couples were related was because of the Austrian Empire's stories and propaganda. Legend had it that a few hundred years ago, the Austrian Empire's emperor, Charles II, had proposed to the queen of the Rona dynasty, who was quite powerful at the time. The queen did not want to agree, so she said that she wanted to see the most beautiful thing. Charles was not prepared at that time, and he picked up a luminous butterfly egg on the ground. Under the catalysis of his curse, the butterfly hatched into a luminous butterfly leader, shocking everyone present. The queen's attitude changed when she saw this, and she felt that the two were fated to be husband and wife, so she agreed to the proposal. The Rona dynasty was then merged into the Austrian Empire's territory, making the empire more prosperous and powerful. The above was the legend passed down in the Austrian Empire, and it could basically be seen as an exaggeration. Luo Ye felt that the story of this legend was not bad, but as for its authenticity, he could not help but laugh. Although he had not seen any historical records and could not tell if the story was true or false, with the character of the little tyrant, the Austrian Empire, if the proposal failed, the next step would be to use force. After all, which king of a small country would agree to a big country annexing a small one? Wouldn't that be retarded? Ignoring the truth and being cruel. The Austrian Empire's skin is still so thick. I understand. After all, they have unified a big country, and the marriages of the neighboring countries should be unified. As for the Austrian Empire, everyone who knows. Pooh. Listening to Luo Ye's sarcasm, Xia Luo could not help but laugh. One of them was born in France, while the other was born in the theocracy. Their families had been anti-Arab fighters for generations, so they got along quite well in this respect. But it has to be said that although the legend was nonsense in their ears, it was because Roja and Charlotte looked at it from a political point of view. In the market of men and women, this legend has a large audience. Ever since the legend became popular, more and more couples came to the edge of the forest to hatch the eggs of the luminous butterfly to express their love to their loved ones. After hundreds of years of publicity, the forest had become a world-renowned love sanctuary. The viewing palace complex in front of them was specially built by Austin for the nobles of various countries. Every February, when the luminous butterflies had just laid their eggs, this place would be crowded with nobles from various countries to participate in a series of interesting and exciting special activities. It could be called a love sanctuary. Of course, in contrast, the luminous butterflies in the Roman forest suffered. They were kidnapped and turned into tool butterflies before they were even born. Honorable sir, madam, may I have a look at your invitations? Of course. At the entrance, a polite and friendly waiter took the invitation from Xia Luo with both hands. The two of them were a perfect match, and their dignified and calm appearance made the waiter not suspicious at all. After a quick check, he returned it with both hands. Welcome, Countess Roland of the Mandel Kingdom, Miss Xia Luo. The waiter's smile became even more enthusiastic because of their noble status. The two of them smiled at each other and entered the venue arm in arm under the guidance of the staff. Feeling the touch of Xia Luo beside her, Luo Ye couldn't help but be amazed by the magic of Sorofia's curse. The Akkad territory of the Saint Maester theocracy was thousands of miles away from the Austrian Empire. Naturally, the two of them weren't using their original bodies. Instead, they were using a spell unique to the Sorofia clan that used twin stones. The twin stone was a unique and rare mineral that had a strange spatial connection. Usually, there were two of them in a pair. When one of them reacted to the curse, the other would react the same way even if they were thousands of miles away. It was the raw material for many expensive wedding rings. The Akat family also had this stone, but it had never been used. However, in the hands of Sorofia, an expert in gold coins and gems, using the twin stone as a catalyst, she could form a body similar to the 3 skills of Afterglow of the Crown from thousands of miles away. Although compared to the short blade of a saint, this body had almost no attack power, but it was not a problem at all if it was just a trip or a holiday party. In this era without advanced communication technology, people's faces were not that familiar. Even a famous beauty like Xia Luo was the same. Plus, the two of them were using alternate accounts, so there was no security issue, so they didn't make any changes to their appearance. Reality was reality. Even if Xia Luo was beautiful, the two of them didn't cause any commotion after entering the palace. Of course, this was because the two of them entered the lovers section. Everyone was busy with their other half, so no one had the time to care about others. If they were in the singles section, Luo Ye didn't know how he would look, but Xia Luo would definitely become a hot topic. He would probably be drowned by the army of single men. "Sir, this is your incubator." "Yes, thank you." After entering the venue, the staff immediately handed a metal box the size of a palm to Luo Ye. The black-haired young man took it with a smile and began to observe it. The people who came to participate in this event were either rich or noble. Naturally, the nobles wouldn't go looking for butterfly eggs themselves. This small box was designed for this purpose, and it had 2 main functions. First, holding the box would prevent people from touching the butterfly eggs themselves. After all, those things were disgusting to some people, so touching them was really uncomfortable. Chapter 150. When Xia Luo casually said this sentence, Luo Ye was speechless for the first time. He stared blankly at the woman in the blue dress who was talking and laughing with the man and the expressionless Xia Luo. For a moment his mind went blank. If she was Xia Luo's mother, then who was he? Luo Ye looked at the blonde man who was talking to his mother-in-law in name, and his face stiffened. As the marriage partner, Luo Ye had naturally seen Xia Luo's family records. He had seen the portraits of the girl's family. Xia Luo's biological father, Bruce, was a brown-haired muscular man. He was obviously not the blonde from before. Most importantly, the information did not say that Xia Luo's parents were divorced. During their marriage, Xia Luo's mother came here. What was the situation now? Catching adultery? Catching his own mother in the act? Was it that exciting? Luo Ye stared at the girl beside him with wide eyes. He was really shocked by the plot of the TV series. Before this, Luo Ye only thought that Xia Luo wanted to see butterflies and was unwilling to enter the singles area to cause trouble, so she kidnapped him to be a tool. But now, it seemed that was not right. What should he do now? Destroy the scene? That shouldn't be the case. It was impossible. The two of them were not in their original bodies. Any source level 6 would be able to defeat them. If that was the case, I understand. You want to collect evidence, right? How should I do it? I haven't learned much about curses in this area. Luo Ye looked at the man and woman in front of him excitedly. He was ready to go, just like a tabloid reporter, waiting for a curse to deliver justice. However, what he did not expect was that the brown-haired girl was stunned when she heard Luo Ye's words. What's wrong? You're welcome. Forget about the others, I will definitely help you with this. The black-haired young man patted his chest and turned into a Tyrant executioner. He looked ahead and gritted his teeth. Damn it, the Tyrant must die. Yellow hair dog is obviously not a good thing. Luo Ye rubbed his fists, but Xia Luo looked embarrassed. She wanted to say something but stopped several times. In the end, she forced a smile on her face. Thank you, Luo Ye, but forget it. Xia Luo smiled sadly and turned to look ahead. You misunderstood. I'm not here to do anything. I just want to see her. Take a look. The last time I saw her was 5 years ago. Luo Ye's eyes widened when she heard Xia Luo's words. The girl pondered for a while before finally downplaying her situation. It was a story that Luo Ye could not find any trace of in the information, and it was also a narrative that made him unable to calm down for a long time after listening to it. To be honest, Xia Luo's situation was a little beyond his imagination. Xia Luo's mother, Adela Milton, was the second daughter of Duke Milton of the Austin Empire. This family was a big family with a long history, originating from the ancient Austin Empire in the Second Era. Strictly speaking, their heritage was longer than Luo Ye's Akate family. With such a long history, their power was naturally not to be underestimated. In fact, in the beginning of the Third Era, when humans migrated to the West, the Milton family was in the position of manager. What happened next was well known. After arriving at the New World, the internal conflicts that had been hidden in the human team erupted. The ancient Austin Empire fell apart. For a time, there were many factions, and everyone went their own way. Milton was a stubborn conservative at that time. As a vested interest, he was unwilling to recognize any organization that escaped from his control. Milton and several other big families of the ancient Austin Empire were the foundation of the establishment of the Austin Empire. In order to highlight their own orthodoxy, this group of remnants of the ancient Austin Empire came up with the famous Orthodox bloodline theory. The Orthodox bloodline theory could be summarized as the theory that except for the Austin Empire, everyone was unruly. This theory was based on history and touted the bloodline of the ancient Austin nobles as noble bloodlines. They were superior bloodlines that should dominate other countries. The citizens of the Austin Empire were Shia's first-class citizens, and the other countries were at most second-class citizens. This theory greatly condensed the power of the Austin Empire for a certain period of time, causing it to annex the surrounding countries after its reconstruction, and its territory continued to expand. In the eyes of the Austin Empire, their war was just and righteous, and it was a punishment for those who violated it. The land that they conquered was not an invasion, but a return. The Orthodox bloodline theory was the root of the Austin Empire's arrogance. After becoming a big country, it became even more popular among the people. Among them, the extremists even advocated marriage between the nobles to prevent this noble bloodline from flowing out. Xia Luo's mother, Audlisa, was a beneficiary and believer of the extreme bloodline theory. More than 10 years ago, in order to improve the relationship with the Austin Empire, Rothschild strongly supported the moderate Milton family. Audlisa, as the representative of the Union, married the president of the Rothschild Union, Bruce. This was the background of Xia Luo's family, a castle in the sky without a trace of romance and freedom. It was completely driven by profit, and there were only results. Luo Ye once heard a saying in his previous life, "When a marriage collapses, the weaker one will be hurt more." This saying was perfectly replicated in Xia Luo. Audlisa abandoned Xia Luo. In the eyes of this bigoted woman, Xia Luo was unclean and had insulted the noble bloodline of the Milton family. Her existence was a stain on her. Chapter 151. What kind of person could be called beautiful and noble? Perhaps this question was too complicated. What was the object of beauty? Where did the concept of nobility come from? Luo Ye did not have the ability to analyze this question from a philosophical point of view, but he at least knew one thing. That was, the values of an ordinary person could not be more normal. If there was anything that could be called a mother's beauty, then perhaps it was the gentle smile she revealed when she stroked her child's head. If there was anything that could be called a woman's nobility, then it was the shining quality and thought that was deeply embedded in their bones. A beautiful face that was meticulously groomed, a self-constructed identity that was superior to others, these things were like bubbles that popped in the face of true beauty and nobility. When the wind of time and era blew, everything would be replaced with the real. Luo Ye looked at Xia Luo in front of him, suddenly understanding where the injustice in his heart came from. So that's how it is. It's because the two of us are mostly similar, but slightly different. The black-haired youth revealed a relieved and helpless smile, watching the light in his hand as he exerted more force. Luo Ye, Akate, everything seemed to have started from his past life, but in fact this was wrong. Although it was very little, Luo Ye vaguely remembered his past naughty and weak self. It was a distant memory that he could barely remember, but faintly existed in his heart. It was the pain and confusion of a child who lost his mother at a young age. It was a pain that was difficult to avoid during his growth. The desire for affection and love accompanied his childhood, but was often unable to obtain them and gradually became distorted because of this. Luo Ye and Xia Luo were similar. They had both struggled alone in an empty home, accompanied by candlelight. When night fell, the moonlight in the room was their only companion. He sympathized with Xia Luo, and at the same time, with his past self who had not remembered everything. But the two of them were different, and that was that Xia Luo actually had a mother. Alisa, this woman's actions, although slight, had indeed pricked Luo Ye's nerves, making him feel a deep sense of disgust. This was the feeling that this woman gave him when she threw something that he couldn't get to her on the ground and trampled on it. Some people say that the more muddy the environment, the brighter the rose that blooms. In that case, Miss Xia Luo, your kindness and strength are the golden rose in my eyes. In the light and waves, the black-haired boy looked into the girl's eyes and said. His golden pupils were now emitting layers of light, majestic and mysterious. The crimson power of the spell was like a flame rolling and multiplying endlessly. Xia Luo stared into his eyes and suddenly saw a little pity in them. In just a few seconds, Xia Luo's pale face quickly turned red. Luo Ye smiled gently. He raised his hand and the red curse power turned into a spiral and drilled into the box. The incubator creaked and was full of cracks. Crack! In the crisp sound of the box breaking, Luo Ye's hand emitted a little light. At the same time, on the high platform in the distance, a ball of light also spread its wings amidst the cheers of the nobles of the Austin Empire. It was a luminous butterfly with a pair of green wings. The moment it appeared, the light reflected on the cheeks of everyone around it. The pureblood nobles of the Austin Empire sang and danced, and Adelisa's face also showed a smile. The most beautiful and dazzling butterfly to appear in the pureblood faction was designed by the Milton family over the years. It represented their nobility and elegance. But this year, the one hatched by the Prince of the Empire was especially beautiful, and its light was also the brightest in all the years. The butterfly broke out of the cocoon and spread its wings. It was about to spread its wings amidst the exclamations of the crowd. No one doubted the status of this butterfly. It was the most powerful and moving one in all the years. Just like the Austin Empire, no one could stop it. The cheers of the crowd were loud and enthusiastic, but soon someone realized that something was wrong. Wait, why isn't it flying down? No, none of the butterflies have flown away. The nobles of the Austin Empire who were looking up at the sky also realized that something was wrong. The young masters and young ladies of the noble families also began to whisper to each other. The guests who came from afar looked at the butterflies hovering above their heads without knowing anything. Everyone's eyes were focused on the black-haired young man in the corner of the high platform. Luo Ye was still suppressing the power of the spell to flow into the incubator. He had already seen the butterfly in the Austin Empire, so he decided to give it his all. This butterfly was not only a competition of personal feelings, but also the first gift to Xia Luo. It must be kind and beautiful, just like the girl in front of him. The moment it was born, the butterflies of the Rumen Forest would have a new leader, and it would be born as a king. Luo Ye was giving it his all, but what he did not know was that at the end of the world where no one could reach, the huge skeleton was also watching. His eyes were shining, waiting for the miracle buried in time to appear again. It's done. A few seconds later, the black-haired young man said so softly. What followed was a muffled sound and a bright spiral of light. The incubator exploded. The cage that held the butterfly egg had completely fallen to the ground and shattered into pieces. In the soft sound of the pieces falling to the ground, the butterflies moved. Chapter 152. When Xia Luo's kiss landed on his face, Luo Ye's mind went blank, but he found it hard to refuse. Not only was the kiss irresistible, but it also represented Xia Luo's sincerity. This was a kiss that represented blessings and luck. It was a reward from a lady to a man who brought her beautiful butterflies. It was reasonable, formal, and irresistible. Luo Ye didn't know how much determination Xia Luo had to make such a move, but at the very least, it should be far more difficult for her to make such a move than it was for ordinary girls. But there was one thing that Luo Ye didn't expect, and that was that this kiss would trigger a conflict in his bloodline. It was a flash of images. There were so many of them that Luo Ye didn't even have time to remember them. At that moment, all the sounds around him disappeared, and Luo Ye's vision seemed to travel back in time hundreds of years ago. It was a man and a woman, a tall woman with reddish-brown hair and a black-haired man with a cold expression. There were many images that flashed past. Battles, life, happy chatting, talking with someone with a serious expression, and finally, a parting kiss. Wait, this is the... Luo Ye looked at the woman who kissed the man's cheek and waved goodbye with a smile. He suddenly had a strange feeling. It was like Xia Luo, but it wasn't. What was this? While Luo Ye was confused, the man in the image turned his head, and his eyes seemed to pass through the barrier of time and space. Luo Ye saw his face clearly for the first time. It's him. At this moment, Luo Ye's heart surged with stormy waves, but he suddenly felt a little relieved. The next moment, the spirit vision ended, and the cheers in his ears drew Luo Ye back to reality. Oh! The excited and enthusiastic cheers came from the audience, not only from the couple area, but also from the singles area. The desire for love didn't care about nationality. Austinites were also happy to eat melons, not to mention in such an atmosphere. Luo Ye, what was that just now? Well, it's a little messy. Let me calm down first. After the kiss, the two separated and were a little dazed by the excessive amount of information, but this expression meant something else in the eyes of others. Thank you, sir and miss, for your demonstration. Dear Xia, their love will be guided by fate. Oh! The crowd cheered louder and louder. Some couples in the singles area began to shout, and couples in the couples area also began to show their affection. Only Luo Ye and Xia Luo were silent in the chaotic background, until the middle-aged man's next spoke. Well, you two, you can go to the pavilion. Luo Ye turned her head in surprise and saw the middle-aged man smiling meaningfully. Sir, I wish you an unforgettable night. The pavilion was a general name, and it could be roughly understood as the presidential suite in Luo Ye's previous life. It had to be said that the Milton family was quite good at business operations. Perhaps they had learned a thing or two from their marriage with Sorophia, but they were very good at marketing. For example, this luminous butterfly convention didn't exist a few decades ago. However, as the Milton family continued to build and promote this place, this local tradition of the Austin Empire became more and more famous in Xia. And this pavilion was a product of this situation. It was designed on the highest floor of the Cliff Palace, and it was as magnificent as a palace with a good view. Every year, except for the group of Austin Pureblood School who had cerebral palsy who entertained themselves, it was the place where couples who hatched head butterflies would stay for the night. With such great luck and blessings, coupled with the fact that they were couples, it was needless to say what they would do in such an environment. But this time, for the newcomers, it was too exciting. You really didn't come here on purpose? No, I didn't. Weren't you there? We left together. I couldn't help it. What could I do in such an atmosphere? On the big bed in the presidential suite, a reddish-brown girl hugged a pillow with half of her face exposed. She looked pitifully at the young man who was eager to explain himself. Her eyes were filled with fear, but occasionally, a hint of expectation flashed in those beautiful pupils of hers. Xia Luo, whose brain was severely congested, didn't know what she was thinking anymore. She felt that Luo Ye seemed to have changed into a different person tonight, and Luo Ye's reaction was basically the same. Chapter 153. Regardless of the world, regardless of the era, the construction of spiritual civilization and self-identity was an important task for every leader. In the Akkad family, their efforts in this field could be traced back to thousands of years ago. An important way for nobles to confirm their identity was through historical inheritance. Therefore, just like any other great noble family, from the moment the family was established, every lord would do their best to leave behind something for their descendants to prove their existence. The most typical example was naturally a portrait. My son knows what I look like, my grandson knows what I look like, but my grandson's grandson might not. This was a very realistic point. Even if it was a long-lived extraordinaire, no one dared to pat their chest and guarantee 100 years of peace, let alone a normal person. Therefore, a portrait was especially important. In order to leave their appearance for their descendants to admire, the head of the Akat family would usually hire a contemporary master to draw a portrait for them when they were in their 20s or 30s. These portraits were kept in the family's special warehouse, and Luoya often looked at them when he was young. Of course, he didn't show any respect at that time, just like any naughty child. Luoya was also a beauty pageant master, and had participated in many most beautiful ancestor contests, and one of them left a deep impression on him. It was an ancestor whose name shook the world a few hundred years ago, Vincent Akat. Vincent's adventure was a family story that Luoya often heard when he was young. After he grew up and awakened his bloodline, Luoya became even more curious about this ancestor who also awakened his bloodline. Vincent's era was too long ago, and most of the related records were lost. However, Luoya clearly remembered his appearance, and that was why he was able to recognize him at the first moment with his spirit vision. I didn't expect the overlord to be him. Luoya stared at the sparkling wine in his glass, and listened to the sound of ice cubes hitting the glass when he shook it gently. For a moment, he had a lot of thoughts, and at the same time, he had a bad premonition and great curiosity. Vincent was one of the strongest people in the human world at that time, so how could the organization he joined be an ordinary one? More importantly, if Luoya wasn't wrong, Vincent shouldn't be the leader of this organization. He clearly remembered one of the scenes that flashed through his mind. It was a scene of a group of people having a meeting on both sides of the table. At that table, Vincent was not at the head of the table, but rather at the back. Of course, he was still young in that picture. He was around 18 years old, but according to historical records, Vincent was at least at source rank 3 at that time. Level 3 source rank, he couldn't even sit in the front row. This was a bit too terrifying. One had to know that in Shiya's current state, there were only a few people who were at source rank 1. Source rank 2 was already considered the peak of combat strength. For example, Prince Vader, whom Luoya had met in the past, had the ability to single-handedly control the battlefield even though he was severely injured. This kind of power was enough to lead people to open up new territories in this world. Next was Source Rank 3. Although it was far from Source Rank 2, it was more than enough to be a general of a large country. However, this level of combat power was actually not ranked at that table. This meant that the overall strength of this organization was very terrifying. And looking at the situation, the Queen of the Sophia dynasty was also a member of this organization. What kind of organization could make Vincent join? The same bloodline made Luoya very curious. If the reason he helped Xia Luo before was for money and strength, then now he really wanted to understand some things. The Akat family's bloodline awakeners were short-lived. Why was this? Did they disappear because of an enemy or an accident? If there was an enemy, then who was the enemy? Countless mysteries rose and fell in the black-haired boy's heart. His worried appearance also attracted the curiosity of the girl on the bed. Luoya, what's wrong with you? You don't look well. HM? It's nothing. I was just thinking about what happened before. Is it about our ancestors joining the Twilight Sage Association? Luoya, who was deep in thought, suddenly turned his head when he heard Xia Luo's words. He stared at the girl with surprise. The reddish-brown-haired girl was stunned. You know about the organization they joined? Yes, I saw the symbol on their chests in my spirit vision. It was indeed the identity symbol of the Twilight Sage Association. Twilight Sage Association? What's that? Luoya's face twitched when he heard the name of this evil organization. In his previous life, nothing good could come out of Twilight. This was even more so for organizations. 8 out of 10 of them wanted to destroy the world. Could this old ancestor of his be a member of some evil cult? Luoya thought so worriedly. Xia Luo's face was not hazy. She put down the hand holding the pillow slightly to reveal her face. After thinking for a while, she said hesitantly, Actually, I only know the name. As for how I know, you also know that Shiya's intelligence network has the widest coverage in Shiya. Because our family lacks internal strength, we have incorporated many transcendent families in the past 100 years. One of them is the famous assassin family, the Kalesa family. Xia Luo spoke softly. Luoya listened for a while swirling his wine. He finally understood the ins and outs of the matter. At the same time, he also understood something. Chapter 154. When he heard Xia Luo's words, Luo Ye's entire body trembled. He turned around to look at the beautiful woman on the bed and suddenly felt a warm current flowing through his body. As the saying goes, it is important to know one's own limits. Knowing how to count is a good virtue. But today, at this very moment, Luo Ye felt that Xia Luo's count was probably failing, similar to the level of failure in his previous life. Dressed like this, sitting on the bed, and saying these words with such an expression, was it an invitation or a seduction? Luo Ye blushed and glared at Xia Lu. The girl immediately knew that her expression was not right and hurriedly explained. I meant that we need to rest. That's not what I meant. Okay, I'll sleep on the sofa. You sleep early. Luo Ye's body was hot and dry. He got up and was about to leave the bedroom when he suddenly felt a tug. The youth turned around and saw the red-haired girl tugging at the corner of his clothes. How can we sleep on the sofa? This bed is so wide. It's fine if we each sleep on one side. The red-haired girl said in a low voice. She had never seen anyone sleep on the sofa and didn't think that it could be used as bedding. Moreover, Luo Ye, whether he was the heir of a marquis or a fiancé, shouldn't sleep on that kind of thing. Of course, these were all external reasons. What really mattered was the girl's heart. There were two reasons why he came to see Adelisa today. One was because Xia Luo wanted to repay Luo Ye for her recent hard work. The other was because Xia Luo wanted to break away from her childhood and no longer be bound by the past. Originally, Xia Luo's heart was filled with disappointment and pain. Even if their relationship was extremely cold, no child would be happy about this kind of thing. When she talked about her past with Luo Ye, it was actually a kind of self-release for the girl. However, what she didn't expect was that this kind of release aroused Luo Ye's resentment and sympathy. When the youth hatched the most beautiful butterfly, affirming her journey alone for so many years, something buried deep in the girl's heart began to overflow uncontrollably. That was the loneliness that she had been suppressing for so many years. That was the weakness of a girl who never exposed herself in front of others. When the butterfly spread its wings, Charlotte's heart seemed to be liberated. For a moment, she even felt that Roha was her family. The two of them had been married for so many years and accompanied each other for a long time. Of course, Xia Luo soon woke up, but that feeling lingered in her heart for a long time. If it was before, Xia Luo would never agree to sleep in the same room as Luo Ye. But now, just sleeping on the sofa made her inexplicably distressed. Xia Luo's feelings were a little out of control. On the other hand, Luo Ye's biological instincts were about to go out of control. Today, Xia Luo was dressed very boldly, perhaps because she came to see her mother. It was as if she was deliberately going against the Austin conservatives. But no matter what the reason was, there was an unavoidable problem. Xia Luo's current charm was fatal. In order to grab onto the corner of Luo Ye's clothes, the girl put down the pillow and threw herself forward. At this time, she was kneeling on the bed with all four limbs. Her big emerald eyes were looking at him with a layer of mist. Under her beautiful face and red lips was a chest that had just grown a little but appeared more youthful. The wine was a little to the head. Luo Ye held the wineglass and tried to find an excuse. The black-haired youth was conceited and had a strong resistance to beauty. In the past 3 years, he had seen the two top beauties, Ai Lizi and Nua Iyer, again and again. But he had never felt this way before. If appearance was the first layer, then the purity, ignorance, and slight fear in the young Miss eyes were the third layer. The natural contrast with her usual intelligence was the fourth layer. And the fifth layer was Xia Luo's origin substance. It was also the greatest temptation that was madly stimulating Luo Ye's evil desires. The Sorophia race had many people and were based on the 3 origin substances of the human race. But for those with a clear Highland elf bloodline, especially Xia Luo, who had awakened an atavistic bloodline, they had their clan's origin substance. Sorophia's origin substance was loyalty. Just like the other origin substances of the Shia world, Sorophia's origin substance, loyalty, also had a similar promotion method. But because she was a ruler, Sorophia's loyalty was mostly to her family and faith. In this aspect, men naturally referred to their own families. But for women, the word loyalty changed with marriage. That's right, most of Sophia's women chose to be loyal to their own families. In other words, they were loyal to their husbands until death. They were the ultimate nemesis of Tyrants. However, just as there were pros and cons to everything, Sophia's loyalty also had an unknown sadness, and that was the fact that she had entrusted it to the wrong person. This was also the reason why there were so many nobles in Shia, and Sophia's women were especially miserable when they met with misfortune. Other people's love was continuous and could be interrupted, but Sophia's love was all in one go. This was also one of the reasons why Xia Luo was afraid of marriage. To a certain extent, it was a path of no return. Luo Ye completely understood this situation, but at the same time, a kind of instinctive possessiveness was born in him. If he tricked this pitifully naive young lady now, he might be able to obtain a lover who would never leave him after one night. Never leave him. This word seemed to have some kind of magic that made Luo Ye's brain continue to overheat. In this materialistic and extravagant society where the nobles were used to cheating, a beautiful, noble, and eternally loyal woman was almost every man's dream. At the crucial moment, Luo Ye, whose face was red from holding back his anger, surged with curses. He raised his hands and cast 2 curses. Cold animal. Thinking has been rationally corrected, greatly reducing the influence of various impulses and desires on decision-making. Chapter 155. King's Selection. A hoarse yet familiar voice entered Luo Ye's ears, causing him to be alert and shudder. It also awakened Luo Ye's consciousness. Shake, the world is shaking. This was what Luo Ye felt in his half-awake state. Deep fatigue attacked his body, making him feel as if he had run a 40-kilometer marathon. His eyelids were heavy and he could not open them, but his ears were noisy. Shouts, a lot of shouts, and it was very mixed. Most of them were men's voices, followed by the sound of something falling on a wooden board. There were a lot of them and they were very dense. Then there was the sound of someone stepping on feces. That's right, it was the sound that Luo Ye heard in TV dramas. Strictly speaking, it was the sound of something sticky stepping on the ground. After that, there was a sound that Luo Ye was more familiar with. It was the sound of metal clashing and the sound of swords cutting into flesh. Luo Ye was familiar with this sound. He had heard it many times in the past, and it came from large-scale multiplayer sports, war. The moment this word flashed in his mind, Luo Ye opened his eyes abruptly and found that his surroundings were completely dark. What's going on? Luo Ye was confused and uneasy. He felt the cold ground and wanted to get up, but he did not expect that as soon as he propped himself up, the ground shook and he fell back down. It was a bad start, but Luo Ye did not come out of it empty-handed. Darkness, shaking, the sound of something rolling on the ground, the sound of fighting and the sound of waves. Luo Ye, who had experienced it once, knew what it meant. Of course, more important and straightforward was Luo Ye's system. Warning, warning, warning. Bloodline promotion signs detected. System assistance bloodline promotion activating. Activating witness status, exploration and freedom, resistance and sacrifice. They are like rolling waves, never yielding. The cracks in the gem are still there, and the gold is dissipated in the ocean. Countdown to witness status end. 119 hours 17 minutes. Bloodline promotion rate, 11%. Evaluation, low, 6. As expected, I knew it. Roha held his head and looked at the system interface. He had a basic idea. According to the current situation and the description of the system, he could only guess where he was now. Golden Ship Crew. Is it 5 days this time? For this situation, the black-haired youth rubbed his head. In fact, he was happy to see this. After all, Roha had too many questions in his heart. What is the purpose of the golden ships and the sages' society? What was the position of Vincent or the Akat family in this? Who are the enemies? Who are your friends? These were all questions that Luo Ye had no clue about and was eager to know the answers to. However, it was worth mentioning that the contents of the system were not limited to these. Pay Tila's blessing. The great being has high hopes for you. Survival is his blessing and your desire. All attributes will be strengthened within 3 minutes. The degree of strengthening depends on the nature of the curse power. Remaining uses. 1. Chapter 156. How strong was Luoya? This was a question that not many people, or perhaps almost no one, knew. Whether it was Ai Lizzie, Ka Dia, or Anna, none of the people in the Akot family who were close to Luoya had actually seen him in action. The heavy protection made Xia Luo misjudge Luoya's strength. After all, in her eyes, Luoya was a scholar. However, in reality, as the contractor of the Gulen Daer, under the 2 years of the giant's guidance, Luoya was no longer the same as before. Putting aside the fact that he was at the peak of Source Level 5 for now, just the exclusive bonus of the crown made Luoya stronger than other people of the same level. His curse power was more condensed, and its speed was faster. Of course, the most important thing was the special characteristic of the crown. Glory return. The warrior who has returned from the ancient times, the power that has disappeared for a long time has finally returned to its homeland. That's right, under the unique ability of the crown, Glory Return, Luoya could use the power of the ancient existence that he had signed a contract with to a certain extent. The Gulen Daer's strength and some undead skills were the source of the crown. As the saying goes, a strong man can defeat 10 skilled men. The strength attribute had always been a hard currency in actual combat, and this powerful strength combined with Luoya's own curse power formed a set of powerful system. If the monster under his feet was classified according to the strength of a human, it was probably at Source Level 5, but in reality, it was smashed into meat paste in a single blow. I can probably protect myself, and as your fiancé and the one who opened this historical fragment, I have the responsibility to protect you. Sorry, I don't accept any rebuttal, and we don't have time to discuss these things now. This monster should be a scaly man. This ship was attacked by the sea folk, and the battle situation doesn't seem to be right. Luoya stretched out his hand to stop the girl's words. He looked up at the figures flashing back and forth in the hole above the deck. He quickly gathered information and urgently made a rough judgment of the battle situation. Based on common sense, the allies were undoubtedly the humans on the ship, and the enemies were the invading sea folk. Just now, he saw 7 humanoid creatures passing by above. Only 2 of them were humans, and there were fewer humans who could understand the shouts. Looking at it all, fuck, we're going to lose. When this thought flashed through his mind, Luoya's heart could be said to sink to the bottom. Even fools knew that this was the sea folk. Once the ship was captured, he and Xia Luo would almost certainly die. Hurry! While the humans are still alive, we must protect this ship. In the deafening battle cries, Luoya's expression changed as he shouted at Xia Luo. Then he stepped on the rotten wood and rushed up to the hole above. The girl, who also understood that this was a critical moment, followed closely behind. During the process of climbing, the light above continued to expand in their eyes. Finally, after a bright light, it turned into a vast sea and sky background. At the moment when they saw the scene outside, the 2 people who rushed out of the hole could not help but be stunned. Their bodies stiffened, and their hearts were greatly shocked. It was a huge fleet sailing on the sea with huge waves, fighting with countless monsters. On the high-pole giant ship, there were people coming and going. Humans were holding swords in their hands and shouting to kill. In the sea, the heads of the monsters swarmed up along the hull of the ship. Their dim yellow eyes were filled with coldness. The sea monsters stretched out their tower-like tentacles and wrapped around the warships. Deep and strange cries that made one's scalp numb came from the deep sea. On the opposite side of the warships, powerful magic fluctuations turned into laser-like shots that shot into the sea. The power was so great that it could set off huge waves. The roars of the humans, the strange cries of the monsters, the roars of the cannons, and the miserable screams of the injured sea monsters. Countless noises rushed into one's ears. It made one's scalp numb, and there was a storm in one's heart. Luoya looked at the scene that resembled a mythical battlefield in a daze for a moment. However, he quickly reacted and looked around. At the same time, Xia Luo's voice sounded. "Be careful," the girl warned loudly. The next moment, two monsters covered in scales rushed towards them. Luo Ye narrowed his eyes and immediately activated Bloody Disaster, after sensing the murderous intent. The dark red color and the two names that were completely garbled allowed Luo Ye to confirm the identity of the enemies. However, this time, the one who made the first move was Xia Lu. Gem trigger. The girl with brownish-red hair stroked the ring on her hand. The next moment, the bright and exquisite ring suddenly emitted light and began to extend. It finally turned into a beautiful pistol-like curse vessel. It was a dreamlike work of art composed of precious metals and minerals. The cartridge that resembled a revolver wasn't filled with ammunition, but with colorful gems. When the sun shone, a bright light flickered in Charlotte's hand, but outsiders didn't know that the light was the blessing of the Grim Reaper. Gem trigger. This was the legendary curse vessel of the Sorophia family. Just like the short blade of the Holy One to the Theocracy, the gem trigger was also a great creation passed down from ancient times. It was the heritage of the Highland Elves. It was a universal trigger that could launch all curses. Ruby reload. The girl with brownish-red hair reached out and raised the curse vessel. She didn't aim, but she pointed in one direction with an indifferent expression. The next moment, her white finger gently tapped the trigger. The crisp sound was pleasant to the ears. Cut. Chapter 157. Captain Jeff felt that this might be the last day of his life. Jeff was 50 years old this year. He wasn't tall, and his appearance wasn't anything special. His gray hair carried the vicissitudes of life, and he wore a simple sailor outfit. He didn't look too different from any other crew member who mopped the deck. However, even though he looked ordinary, this middle-aged man was actually an expert whose strength had reached Origin Grade 3. The Golden Fleet was the name of the Kingdom of Sophia's army. It was a huge fleet that had already pacified the sea before the humans had even pacified the land. The ships were divided into 3 classes. As the captain of the first-class vice flagship, St. Paul, Jeff's strength was well known. However, he felt that he was powerless now. The deep-sea scaly people were the arch-enemies of the Golden Fleet. As an opponent, they had ample experience in dealing with the Golden Fleet. However, due to the previous civil war, part of the St. Paul's functions had been damaged, causing the vice-captain of the St. Paul's to be seriously injured. On the Golden Fleet's warships, if the captain was injured, it would affect the morale. However, as long as he didn't die, it wouldn't be a big problem. However, the 2 vice-captains were very precious. The vice-captains of the Golden Fleet all had the blood of the Highland Elves. They might not be strong, but they were the key to many curse devices on the warship. The reason why the Golden Fleet was so powerful was that it used a lot of the lost technology of the Highland Elves. These things required the blood of the Sophia family to be activated. It could be said that the vice-captain of each ship was a strategic resource. A golden warship that was manned and an unmanned golden warship were 2 completely different things. Usually, the vice-captain's control room was very safe. However, during the Civil War, one of the vice-captains defected to the rebels. The St. Paul's warship was hit by a curse bomb during the battle with the rebels, causing the protection of the control room to be greatly damaged. Although they won that battle, no one would have thought that this small aftereffect would bring disaster to everyone. Die. A heavy punch with a dragon-like curse power smashed the chest of a giant scaly person. Jeff's eyes widened in anger as he roared and directly tore the general of the 3rd source rank scaly person in front of him in half. Flesh and blood splattered like rain. The middle-aged man whose body was dyed red looked at the shocked expression of the scaly person before he died and shook his head. I can't fight in the water. You can't fight on land. Thinking of this, Jeff exhaled and reached out his hand to cover the bloody hole in his abdomen. He turned his head to look at the people around him. How is Vice Captain Ravel? I'm afraid Vice Captain Raway won't make it. When the ship doctor covered in blood spoke these words, the expressions of everyone nearby changed. An indescribable silence abruptly appeared in this battlefield filled with war cries that shook the heavens. Vice Captain Ravel was dying, which meant that the golden battleship would stop operating. Now, there were many curse vessels protecting everyone. Soon, the electric net outside the hull would disappear. At that time, everyone would no longer face the elite army of the scaled people, but countless monsters as vast as the sea. How long can the power grid last? About 10 minutes? 10 minutes? Jeff muttered to himself as he looked at the horde of scaly people and the sailors who were fighting in front of him. As a person who had been on the sea for half his life, he was already prepared for it, but it was a pity that so many young people had died. A strong sense of sorrow rose in the middle-aged man's heart. He quickly walked to the front of the young man who had fallen to the ground and bent over to look at his pale face. "Ravel, can you hold on for another 10 minutes? Brothers, let's drag a few of them down with us. At that time, you will activate the central golden soul, bring the big guys outside, and let's go together." The young man, whose chest and abdomen had been cut open and whose consciousness had begun to blur, widened his eyes slightly. At this moment, the young man who was on the verge of death seemed to have regained his consciousness. He smiled with a little pride and made a promise softly. All right. Leave it to me, Captain. Good job." Looking at the young man who was dedicated to his duty at the last moment, Jeff grinned. He raised his head and looked around. All he saw were calm faces. Those were the warriors who buried their fear in the bottom of their hearts and faced death with equanimity. "Sorry, everyone. What does the dog trader and the fish cub have to do with you, Captain? It's the last battle, the shield is yours." The warriors chuckled, stood up and walked to the front line under Jeff's leadership. The old captain reached out and wiped his eyes, burying the last sadness in his heart. Next, it was a desperate charge. Killing more enemies and reducing the pressure on their allies was the last thing they could do. The sailors drew their swords and axes, but before the final battle began, the uproar at the front line had rushed into their ears. "Captain, who's that?" The sailors next to him exclaimed and pointed to the front. Jeff wiped his hands and looked forward, and his eyes widened suddenly. Chapter 158. Roars, explosions, the monster's screams, and the boy's warm breath. These were all Xia Luot felt at this moment. Although they were in the middle of a battle, such a close posture still made the girl's heart flutter. But soon, Xia Luot came back to her senses. The huge commotion caused the two sides to stop fighting. Xia Luot leaned in Luo Ya's arms and opened her eyes. She found that the curse power in front of her had almost disappeared. Seeing such a good opportunity, the girl's eyes widened. She decisively moved the trigger, but this time, she aimed at the boy in her arms. Xia Luot? Trust me." Luo Ya, who was shocked, looked into the girl's eyes and nodded involuntarily. As the girl assured him, the trigger was pulled and a magnificent white light flashed. Luo Ya's vision was filled with light at this moment. When he could see clearly again, the surrounding scenery had completely changed. He looked around and saw the sailors who were equally confused. This child isn't the one just now? How did she get here?" Before the sailors finished speaking, the trigger was pulled again in the distance. Suddenly, a figure flashed above Luo Ya. Xia Luot descended from the sky and slapped Luo Ya, who was about to get up, back onto the floor. Xia Luot's good figure made a contribution at this moment. Luo Ya, who had the air in his lungs squeezed, was fine after coughing twice. Before the two boys and girls who had reunited could celebrate, the sailors rushed over, giving Luo Ya a fright. "Wait, you don't have to say we understand." "What's going on? What do you understand?" Luo Ya, who was anxious to clarify his position, was stunned when he saw the sailors rushing over turn around and protect the two of them with their weapons. They looked even more anxious than Luo Ya. "Child, do you know how to sail?" "Ha!" Captain Jeff's eyes lit up as he asked Xia Luot, who was behind Luo Ya. The girl couldn't help but be stunned. Seeing this, Jeff suddenly understood and hurriedly pointed at the ship's doctor and yelled, "Quick, keep Royai alive for me. At the very least, we should teach this child the electric fence. Whether we can survive or not depends on this." The captain explained the situation in a few words. Luo Ya, who heard that the battleship was about to self-destruct, was dumbfounded. Xia Luot hurried to the side of the dying vice captain and began to concentrate on learning the basic operations of this behemoth. Learning how to operate a warship now? Are you fucking kidding me? Luo Ye couldn't fully accept the situation until now. He couldn't understand why there was such a job. Although Xia Luo was talented and intelligent, that was business. This was not the same as engineering, right? Although he was cursing wildly in his heart, reality was still reality. The battle cries continued, and people or monsters fell every second. Luo Ye looked at the battlefield filled with battle cries and gritted his teeth. He grabbed a sword from the ground and rushed forward. Captain Jeff, can we only survive if Xia Luot activates that electric fence? That's too risky. Is there no other way? There is, but it's impossible unless we can drive all the fish on the deck down and occupy the ship's railing. The gray-haired captain stretched his hand forward and deflected all the high-pressure water arrows shot by the scaly men. He naturally knew that the success rate on Xia Luot's side was not high, but compared to taking back the ship's railing, the girl's side had a higher chance. It was obvious that if the crew was strong enough to drive the enemy off, the St. Paul wouldn't be in such a situation now. Whether it was impact or explosive power, the sailors who had been fighting for a long time no longer had it. Is it impossible? That's not necessarily true. The black-haired young man muttered to himself. He stroked his long sword as if he was sharpening the dazzling cold blade. A red light flashed in his golden eyes, and the remaining curse power burst out like a python, turning into red thunder roaring in the air. Boom! The scattered and exploding lightning was like knives and swords, and within the rolling thunder, there seemed to be countless warriors roaring and roaring. The powerful presence attracted the attention of all the sailors. Jeff's eyes widened. He never thought that in such a desperate situation, there would be one miracle after another. The group skill was a legendary ability in Shiya's chaotic country. It was said that the person who had it would be chosen by the heavens and be born as a king. In the eyes of the crowd, the young man covered in thunder and lightning was angry but indifferent as ice. The red thunder crown crowned him. At this moment, he seemed to see the proud prince in the palace of the holy capital, turning his face to him under the rainy night and showing him an unruly smile. Chapter 159. What was the most handsome thing in a man's fantasy? Luo Ye didn't know about other people, but in his mind, there were only two things. Cannons, giant ships. Then there was the sea of stars, dreams, and faraway places. Oh. Fuck them. The cheers of the crowd were deafening, like a match that ignited the dreams of the black-haired youth buried in his previous life. The caliber was justice, and the range was truth. Luo Ye, senior disciple of the Cannon Tower Church, joined the battle. Luo Ye, who was quickly infected by the atmosphere, shouted with the crowd. Captain Jeff saw this and laughed loudly. He was very familiar with this reaction. Every young person who saw the main cannons of the Golden Ship Regiment for the first time would fall into this fanaticism. Some people would even worship the cannon at the bow of the ship. The enemies in the sea where the giant octopus monster was located had been annihilated by the Golden Ship Regiment. This powerful attack had completely changed the situation of the battle. Without the octopus monster, the sea folk had lost the means to directly threaten the ship. They had no choice but to retreat. The monsters in the sea dived into the depths of the sea and disappeared without a trace. Seeing this, the crew sighed in relief. The joy of surviving a life and death situation made everyone lose control. They all laughed and shouted as if they were venting their emotions. Xia Luo, you're a genius? In the midst of the uproar of the crowd, Luo Ye rushed to the red-haired girl and gave her a big hug. In the face of Luo Ye's excited and unhesitant intimate action, Xia Luo couldn't be as calm as he was during the battle. You, what are you doing? Let go. The girl, who was originally exhausted due to the overdraft of her curse power, suddenly felt her body temperature rise in the boy's arms. Her face was red, but she weakly patted Luo Ye's back. However, this slight resistance had no effect. It didn't even attract Luo Ye's attention. After a round of close contact, the boy looked at his system and checked the evaluation. Evaluation, average, 56, Sure enough, the damage of the allies this time was also counted in the evaluation. Luo Ye looked at the evaluation that rose to 56 points and was very excited. Last time in the historical fragment, Luo Ye had to personally fight with the talents for the evaluation. How could it be as good as bringing people to fight together with him now? And from the perspective of survival, it was a great thing to have allies around him. The black-haired boy was happy while thinking about the reason. He felt that this should be because this battle was a battle between humans and foreign races, so he could gain so much when he led the humans' counterattack. You're too close. Sorry. Charlotte's voice was like a mosquito's protest. The youth recovered and hurriedly separated. Roha let go of her hand and looked at the girl with tears in her eyes. Charlotte bit her lips and stared at him. This was the first time she scolded him since the butterfly incident. Stupid. Idiot. Unbelievable. I was wrong. I was just a little excited when I saw how good your cannon skills were. Luo Ye was embarrassed as he muttered to himself. At the same time, the doubts in his heart grew stronger. He could not figure out how Xia Luo learned how to pilot such a super battleship in such a short time. However, this was not the main point now. Oh, is that so? Don't think that I didn't see what you did. You didn't believe that I could succeed at all and rushed out yourself, right? The black-haired boy looked away guiltily when his thoughts were exposed. Xia Luo saw this and glared at him fiercely. The girl recalled how Luo Ye looked when he led all the humans to charge. Her heart was in turmoil. Even now, she could not calm down. Xia Luo had never seen the boy at that time. In her impression, Luo Ye was more like a bookish businessman. However, at that moment, Xia Luo saw the shadow of a hero in him. Heroes could make any girl's heart flutter. That was why there were many beauties around heroes since ancient times. Xia Luo was no exception. However, other than her heart fluttering, the girl also had an unknown worry in her heart. Why did he rush so far forward? What if he was injured? What if he was hit by a water arrow? Why was a level 5 source ranker at the front while Captain Jeff, a level 3 source ranker, followed behind him? Looking at her companion who was in the limelight, not only was he not happy, but he was worried. This was the first time Xia Luo experienced this feeling. She did not know why. She only knew that it was a great test for her heart. She did not want to experience it a second time. I am afraid that Mr. Deputy Captain's injuries are serious and can't hold on until I teach you the technique. It's double insurance, ha. Clumsy lie. I can't be bothered with you. Xia Luo waved her hand and the battleship began to leave the battle area in the same direction according to the instructions broadcast to the entire ship. Once they left the battle area, it also meant that this encounter was completely over. Chapter 160. Vincent? You are one of Vincent's men? In front of the St. Paul's captain's room, a tall brown-haired beauty looked at the black-haired, golden-eyed young man in astonishment. What's going on? The flood has washed over the Dragon King's temple. Family? Wait, that's not right. Vincent is only 20 this year. Why haven't I heard that he has a younger brother? Furthermore, if you are a member of the Akot family, you shouldn't have come. I have already sent a letter to Vincent. There is no need for him to send anyone else. Your Majesty, are you referring to the letter that states that you will arrive at the Twin Horns port in the middle of April? You have seen the letter? Of course. In order to help you get through this difficult time, the necessary information is necessary. The head of the family has already shown me the letter. Under the astonished gaze of Isabella, Luo Ye reached into his pocket with a calm expression and took out a golden sealed letter. Then he transformed on the spot. Your Majesty the Queen, this is a keepsake that my brother gave me before I came here. However, due to the fact that the Twilight Sage Association's delivery involves the attributes of space and time, this letter is as fragile as if it has been placed there for hundreds of years. Please be careful. As Luo Ye spoke, he passed the letter to Isabella with both hands. Looking at the woman, his eyes were filled with smiles and friendliness, as though he already knew of the relationship between her and his brother. The brown-haired queen was taken aback. She hesitated for a moment before accepting the letter. Why is this fellow so good at deceiving others? Behind Luo Ye, the brown-haired young lady was trying her best to control her facial expression. She was speechless to the extreme. She was impressed by the young man's ability to link everything together and treat it as a stitched monster. This fellow, it is fortunate that I was prepared. Otherwise, I might have been deceived by him as well. The young mistress was unconsciously rejoicing. On the other hand, the queen caressed the familiar letter and observed the brittle paper in astonishment. Just as the saying goes, no matter how one tries to hide it, the traces of time cannot be erased. Buckwheat paper is tough and durable. It would probably take hundreds of years for the paper to become so brittle. I didn't expect such a thing to happen. Was a scholar who sent you here? Isha Bela's doubts were mostly eliminated by the evidence, but she still didn't completely let down her guard. Faced with a new problem, Luo Ye pondered for a moment and shook her head. My apologies, Your Majesty. Although I know that the ones who sent us here are the members of the Twilight Sage Association, I am not one of them. I have only heard about them from my elder brother. Thus, I do not know who they are. What does he look like? I'm not sure. In fact, we can only see a blurry figure. In the face of Her Majesty's interrogation, Luo Ye answered with a troubled expression. However, not only did this I don't know answer not arouse Isha Bela's suspicion, but it also made her completely believe in Luo Ye. The Dusk Sages Association was an organization where all the powerful individuals in the world were united for a common goal. As outstanding individuals or even rulers of various domains, the members of the Dusk Sages Association were likely to have grudges against each other. In order to not affect their work efficiency, none of the members of the Dusk Sages Association showed themselves. Even their voices were masked. Scholar was a senior member of the Twilight Sage Association. Her supernatural powers were outstanding, but she was also extremely cautious. If Luo Ye revealed her appearance, Isha Bela would probably start a war without hesitation. Luo Ye's suspicions were basically eliminated. Isha Bela then turned her gaze to Xia Luot, whose hair color was similar to hers. The black-haired young man's heart skipped a beat when he saw this, but he didn't expect that. Xia Luot was even better at acting than him. Realizing that Isha Bela was looking at her, Xia Luot paused for a moment. The next moment, tears suddenly welled up in her eyes. The reddish-brown-haired young woman trembled as she stretched out her arm and opened her palm. In the center of her palm, a sparkling gemstone trigger was placed flat on her palm, shining brightly. This is my keepsake, Your Majesty Isha Bela. Please help the Sorofia family on account of our relationship as fellow humans. What? Faced with the crying young woman and all sorts of information, Isha Bela was rather confused. Xia Luot sobbed as she told the story to the queen's astonished and confused gaze. It was 200 years ago when the Sorofia family broke away from the human army and migrated to the south. Some of the weaker members of the Sorofia family fell behind and didn't manage to catch up in time. As a result, they were captured by the Austin Empire and forced to join the empire. They were then assigned to be under the rule of the Milton family. The Highland Elf bloodline was naturally sensitive to money. The Milton family took advantage of this to force the Sorofia family to do business in order to earn money. However, due to historical reasons, the Sorofia family was discriminated against as traitors and lived in persecution and suffering. Family curses and bloodline curses were continuously broken for more than 200 years, causing the Sorofia family to be unable to fight back. The current head of the Sorofia family, Bruce, was deeply worried about this. However, he accidentally heard about the existence of the Sorofia kingdom from the Akkad family. For the future of the Sorofia family, he ordered his daughter, Xia Luot, to bring the family's only ancestral secret treasure, the stone trigger, as a keepsake and ask for help from the Sorofia royal family. As this mission required a Highland Elf bloodline holder, Xia Luot volunteered herself. With the combination of the two, she was finally qualified to follow Luo Ye and be sent here by the curses. She also succeeded in meeting her own people. Xia Luot told the story with tears in her eyes. Her sincere complaints attracted the attention of everyone nearby. Not to mention Isha Bela, If it wasn't for the fact that Luo Ye knew about Xia Luo's background, even Luo Ye would have believed her. How could this person be so good at lying? Luo Ye looked at the crying young woman and sighed in her heart, the same as what Xia Luo had 5 minutes ago. However, she had to admit that the duet of this unscrupulous fiancé couple was indeed effective. I didn't expect that the people who were separated back then actually survived. Chapter 161. What was the background of Vincent and Isha Bela's era? Luo Ye didn't have time to flip through the book because he entered the historical period too suddenly. But with his excellent memory of historical records, he could vaguely recall the general trajectory of Vincent's life. It was the 261st year of the Third Era. This year was a familiar year in the eyes of future historians because this was the period of the First War of the Mutated Species. In the eyes of the later generations, this period of time was terrifying and dark. Everyone who read history books focused their attention on the eastern region and the subsequent large-scale human battles. No one cared about the kingdom of Sophia in the distant south. In the subsequent wars, human literature was destroyed by the flames of war. Not even 1 out of 10 remained. This could be said to be the reason why there were almost no records of the kingdom of Sophia in the future. But today, Luo Ye learned something else and discovered that the kingdom of Sophia, or at least Queen Isha Bela, didn't seem to be so far away from the world and enjoyed a paradise alone. 6 disasters? Sister Isha Bela, what is that? Oh, Vincent didn't tell you, right? Well, he's very tight-lipped. The brown-haired woman listened to Xia Luo's question and said so. Then she looked at the 2 people in front of her and smiled helplessly. Actually, in theory, I should keep it a secret, but because of our race, everyone on the ship basically already knows, so I'm too lazy to keep it a secret. Luo Ye, you have already read the letter before, right? Aren't you curious about what they is? Wait, don't tell me. That's right, the golden ship received a commission from the Sage Society to transport the 6 disasters egg. The brown-haired queen said so. She turned her head and looked at the white sail outside the window. She raised her hand and took a sip of wine. After pondering for a long time, she suddenly asked a question in a heavy voice. You too, do you believe in fate? Fate? Hearing Isha Bela's question that came out of nowhere, Luo Ye and Xia Luo were both stunned. The black-haired boy was hesitant about this mysterious question. The girl who had more right to speak thought for a while and slowly said, the scope of fate is too broad. It has different meanings depending on the target. What kind of fate do you mean by fate? What kind of fate? If I have to say, it's humans. Isha Bela's answer made Xia Luo's eyes widened in confusion. Luo Ye was also confused and couldn't help but complain in his heart. What's going on? Fate can't satisfy you two anymore? Is the prophecy of the apocalypse? Luo Ye's face twitched when he thought of a long series of numbers such as 1999, 2012. He suddenly felt that Isha Bela's words were a little unreliable. Although the Highland Elves were good at divination and were rumored to be able to observe fate, in fact, it was difficult to accurately observe the fate of a single person in this world with extraordinary power, let alone the fate of the entire human race. In the end, fate was like a thread. The most terrible thing was variables. The fate of the entire human race was too many variables. It was impossible to control it. Wouldn't the result be a fantasy? Luo Ye complained in his heart. Xia Luo, who knew the industry, was also puzzled. Isha Bela looked at the 2 who wanted to say something but didn't care. She shook her wine glass and asked the second question. It has been more than 200 years since we moved to the new world from the west. The current human world has just recovered from the disaster. A new world is being developed and a new order is being established. The great catastrophe at the end of the Second Age was ultimately defeated by the tenacity of the human race. But have you ever thought about one thing? In the distant past, in the ancient times that can only be glimpsed from myths and legends, where did the powerful civilizations with extraordinary power go? Isha Bela's words made Luo Ye and Xia Luo speechless. Indeed, the existing human families with ancient bloodlines were quite powerful. People like Heathcliff could even lead and establish a country. Then the question was, Where were the real angels? It wasn't just the angels. Putting aside the giants, who were obviously barbaric races, the Highland elves had many unique spells and technology. These pioneers established a brilliant civilization far before the human race. But where did they go now? Without a doubt, Luo Ye and Xia Luot couldn't answer this question. Perhaps no one could. Isha Bela obviously didn't want to ask them for the answer to this eternal mystery. She just took a sip of wine and told them some of the facts she knew. Destroyed, all destroyed. Those once glorious civilizations collapsed in the long river of time. There are many reasons, such as war, disease, environmental changes, and man-made disasters. Civilization is a very interesting thing. It can be very strong sometimes, but it can be very fragile sometimes. Fate is a fair thing sometimes. No matter if it's an extraordinary race or a human, no matter if it's strong or weak, the future is unpredictable. It's just that the scales of fate will occasionally be moved by some dark hands. Isha Bela looked at the two children opposite her and revealed a fact in a calm voice. Some civilizations were destroyed, and what killed them was the 6 disasters left behind by Mother Goddess. Destroyed? Mother Goddess? Chapter 162. Bloodline Reconstruction? What the hell was that? And what exactly was the crown stone? Luo Ye was dumbfounded as he looked at the inexplicable notifications in the system. He had never thought that this disaster, which was related to the rise and fall of human civilization, would have something to do with his bloodline. Ding! Bloodline reconstruction successful. Detected crown stone variant. Initiating preliminary evaluation. System evaluation. Absorbable. Recommended absorption level. Based on the host's specific situation, the variant's growth rate will be evaluated. Recommended absorption level. B+. Warning. Warning. The host's level is not up to standard. There is a certain risk in absorbing. The system has activated partial absorption support. Estimated cost, 300,000 gold coins. Due to the host's insufficient balance, the system has activated the loan function. Not the first loan. Interest rate, 10% per month. With a 10% monthly interest rate, you will be able to borrow 300,000 gold coins. Yes/no, Luo Ye was dazzled by the long string of data. Countless thoughts began to appear in his mind, but there was only one word that stood out the most. Loan. Another loan. When he saw that the system had started to run out of money again, Luo Ye felt that something was wrong. He didn't think that it would actually give him a loan, and the interest rates. 10% per month. 30,000 gold coins in a month? Even robbing people wouldn't be that fast, right? What kind of operation was this? I'm borrowing money from myself? Isn't the interest rate too high? My territory's capital probably won't be able to support this kind of interest. The cost is equal to the benefits. The probability of the crown stone appearing is extremely low, so this opportunity cannot be missed. Successfully absorbing it will greatly increase the host's strength, but powerful skills have a certain degree of side effects. Please make your choice. The system's words made Luo Ye grit his teeth and fall silent. There was no doubt that this loan and the price he would have to pay would be enormous, but just as the system said, this was also a great opportunity. Frozen Earth Creator. Although Luo Ye didn't know the relationship between this terrifying monster and the crown, origin substance, he didn't need to think to know that this civilization destroyer's power was shocking. Come to think of it, although the French system's replies were infuriating, it had only allowed Luo Ye to take out a loan once. That time, it was the awakening of his bloodline, which almost changed Luo Ye's life. Then, this time, Luo Ye's expression changed. He turned his head and looked at the girl who was talking to Isha Bela. The uneasiness in his heart made him frown. Luo Ye felt guilty that he had involved Xia Luot in this historical episode. Originally, with his current strength and skills, Luo Ye felt that he had the ability to protect the girl. However, after hearing Isha Bela's words and seeing the Frozen Earth Creator, Luo Ye wasn't so sure anymore. Because he came from the future, he knew that Twin Horn Harbor was frozen. In this era, Twin Horn Harbor was still a good harbor. However, in the future, it would become a cursed harbor that would freeze forever. Countless explorers would be forever buried in that terrifying world of ice and snow, leaving behind only cursed legends. Chapter 163. Inside the cabin, the crisp sound of gemstone triggers rang out continuously. The shattered gemstones turned into golden dust that hit Luo Ya's body and gradually dissipated. Xia Luo's frozen earthmaker's surroundings had turned into a sea of fire under the bombardment of gemstones. Layers of heat waves slightly recovered Luo Ya's condition, but these flames only lasted for a moment and extinguished themselves a few seconds later. The flames of the curse power were like candles in the wind under the even stronger chill power of the curse power. However, Milady didn't care about this at all. More than a dozen gemstones were enough to warm Luo Ya up a little. Her real trump card wasn't here. Boil. Seal. The reddish-brown-haired girl's emerald eyes glowed brightly. Her bloodline surged as she pointed the trigger forward. Her majestic aura was like that of a queen commanding thousands of troops. Under Xia Luo's command, the golden liquid metal soldiers responded. Buzz. Violent buzzing and vibrations began to emanate from the hull of the ship. The golden liquid army rushed out of the crisscrossing pipes and charged towards the ice. The sailors on the ship looked at each other, not knowing what was going on. At the same time, Isabella also made her move. I see. Is this the power of the Akat family's bloodline? It's amazing. No wonder the Sage Society sent you here. Then, let me, your elder sister, help you a little. Milady Queen looked at the boy and girl below. The last doubt in her heart was completely eliminated. She laughed heartily, and the statue of the goddess of fate that Luo Ya was familiar with suddenly appeared behind her. The only difference was that the golden statue of Isabella was much clearer. Scales of fate. The beautiful and heroic woman shouted. The golden statue then stretched out the hand holding the scales. At the same time, a stack of chips condensed from golden light appeared in Isabella's hand. Xia Luo, watch carefully. This is the true way to use our bloodline. We are not the ones who obey fate, but the ones who change it. These are the chips condensed from the fate of our lives. Family, friends, subordinates of the kingdom, all glory and shame, glory and destruction, all are in these 10 chips. With these chips as the wager, we will pry fate. Isabella looked down at the two from above. At this time, stars were circling above the cabin. The statue of the goddess of fate stretched out her arms, and images appeared on both sides of the scales. One was a boy with black hair and golden eyes. The other was an embryonic ice monster. Between the two sides, the balance went up and down and finally stopped at the position of the ice monster. Isabella saw this and smiled slightly. If it's only this small difference, then one will be enough. Fate chips, place your bets. Roger that. Isabella flicked her finger, and a golden chip jumped and smashed into Luo Ya's side. The next moment, the golden statue's mechanical voice sounded, and the scales suddenly tilted. The statue of the goddess of fate released a golden light. The ice monster seemed to be cursed by this light, and its strength was greatly reduced. In just a few seconds, there were only a few white streams of air surrounding it. Luo Ya felt a strange power descending on him, as if fate was on his side. The boy finally understood why the system had such a high success rate. 10, 9, 8. Under the protection of this bloodline skill and his fiancée's gemstone behind him, Luo Ya finally finished absorbing the cold air around him. The moment the white streams of air were completely pulled over, the system prompt sounded. Ding! Partial absorption successful. Acquired skill. Touch of frozen earth. Ah, I finally succeeded. Under the double attack of capitalism and feudal superstition, the ancient monster finally lowered its head. Luo Ya saw this and breathed a sigh of relief. 300,000 yuan, not a waste. The boy smiled stiffly. The next moment, his vision turned black and he fainted. At midnight, under the pale moonlight, a fleet was anchored in the sea where the Golden Fleet once fought. Small boats circled the sea area mixed with the golden liquid to collect samples. On the bow of the ship, a group of believers in white robes was praying to the moonlight under the leadership of an old man. The whole fleet was silent and strange. Across the entire fleet, such a scene was happening at every bow. Chapter 164. In the dark valley, Luo Ye stared blankly at the distant mountains that seemed like an iron curtain. In front of him, the blonde woman on the throne appeared from the darkness. Her exquisite figure was covered in an ancient robe, and her blonde hair emitted a faint golden light in the darkness. We meet again. It seems that you have successfully survived the crisis, but I didn't expect that you didn't use my blessing. Should I praise you for this? Or did you do it on purpose? On purpose? What do you mean? Fear, worry. These are the emotions that humans naturally have towards us. To a certain extent, powerful beings are connected with fear. Being afraid of being interfered with and controlled is an instinct of living beings. Under the dark mountain range, the sunlight was dim. Luo Ye looked back at the blonde woman's eyes that were emitting light. He remained silent for a long time about her speculation and observation. I'm not on guard against you. In the end, rather than saying that I don't want to use your skill, it's better to say that I don't want to use it. Don't want to use it? The black-haired boy lowered his head slightly, as if thinking about something. Under Pei Tila's gaze, he said faintly, I have a premonition that danger is approaching. It's just that the previous small skirmishes are far from the time to reveal my trump card. The strongest power is used in the most dangerous moment. This has always been my principle. Oh? I didn't expect that you would cherish my blessing so much. To be honest, hearing you say that makes me feel good. Indeed, cherishing my blessing is respect for me. It's good to know how to respect. Pei Tila raised the corner of her mouth, and a smile appeared on her beautiful face. However, she also had some doubts. But to be honest, the difference between your true self and your age is quite big. True self? That's right. This space is my world. Even if you can come in, you can't deceive me here. The you here is the real you without any disguise. So it's like that. No wonder I keep having a strange feeling. Luo Ye nodded. He finally understood why he felt unnatural after coming here. The blonde woman leaned on the throne and looked at the boy. The light in her eyes intensified. No matter what, since you've fulfilled the first promise and met me again, I should show you some sincerity. Pei Tila's vertical pupils shone brightly. She stared at the black-haired youth and locked eyes with him. At this moment, Luo Ye felt his eyes burning and couldn't help but narrow them. What did you do? Hee, it's just a small gift. You'll notice it when the skill is activated. Pei Tila smiled as she looked at Luo Ye. She seemed to be staring at something far away. After a long while, she opened her red lips as if she had thought of something. By the way, I heard that guy say that he wants to ask questions, right? That guy? It's that noisy giant outside. What a troublesome fellow. Gulen Dayer? The black-haired boy's eyes widened. Pei Tila nodded her head. She rested her chin on her hand and looked at Luo Ye with a smile. She was obviously very interested in him. That's him. He was very angry because he couldn't enter this place. He even threatened me not to have any ideas. There's actually such a thing? You guys can contact each other? Of course, but you're still the bridge of communication. But I'm really surprised. You can actually make that kind of existence care about you. How did you do it? Pei Tila curiously looked down at the boy who was happily thinking about his companions. Luo Ye was stunned. He thought for a while and smiled. Because we're friends. Friends? The blonde woman widened her eyes at Luo Ye's words. After blinking her beautiful eyes, Pei Tila suddenly laughed. You can actually become friends with that kind of guy. Ha, little guy, you're really interesting. Chapter 165. In the cabin, when Isabela's words reached Xia Luo's ears, the reddish-brown-haired girl's body stiffened. Aye, Sister Isabela? What did you say? You didn't hear me clearly? Seriously, we don't have much time to waste now. The brown-haired woman frowned when she saw Luo Ye's condition. She pushed Xia Luo to the bed despite the cold air. Her Majesty Queen tried her best to maintain her composure. She pointed at the black-haired boy's lips and said, "Kiss him." No, why do you have to do this? Xia Luo's body flashed with light as she maintained Luo Ya's state. However, her face instantly flushed red. Her mind was filled with question marks as she looked at her sister, behind her. Isha Bela was helpless when she saw her sister's innocent look. Her Majesty Queen looked at her younger sister and couldn't help but worry. Xia Luo was perfect in her eyes. She was beautiful, kind-hearted, and a good child. She was also extremely talented. Even Isha Bela didn't dare to say that she was better than her. However, there was one thing that made her Majesty Queen speechless. She was too pure in her feelings and was too shy. The heroine Isha Bela recalled her love experience. She remembered that when she first met Vincent during her travels, she was beaten up by him in the ruins. At that time, Isha Bela was young and hot-blooded. She was proficient in gemstone spells. She didn't hold back and beat Vincent until his face was swollen. In the end, she accidentally triggered a trap and the two of them were trapped underground. What happened next could be said to be a reversal. Although Isha Bela was powerful, she only wanted to obtain the treasures in the ruins. She had no interest in archaeology. On the contrary, Vincent, who was beaten down, relied on his knowledge to find a way out. The two of them turned from enemies to friends along the way and worked closely together. Finally, they managed to escape with their lives. To be honest, Isha Bela had always felt that this episode was quite strange. She even suspected that Vincent had some strange XP. However, Vincent had been quite normal all these years, so she didn't think too much about it. After that, Vincent traveled with Isha Bela's team to many places. His strength grew stronger as time passed. However, as the heir to the kingdom of Sofia, Isha Bela did not reveal her identity. A year later, the journey ended. Isha Bela, who knew what her little brother was thinking, could only leave with a kiss and a sigh before leaving without saying goodbye. It wasn't until 5 years later that the two of them met again at the Evening Sage Club. Although Vincent couldn't see her face and her voice had been altered, he still vaguely recognized Isha Bela. The two of them, who met again, felt guided by fate. Their old feelings for each other were rekindled, and they finally got together. There was no doubt that Isha Bela and Vincent's relationship was a result of many twists and turns. Although they were engaged, it was actually a free-spirited relationship. It was a relationship that was deep and could withstand many twists and turns. However, in Isha Bela's eyes, her little sister's relationship with Xia Luo was not. An engagement that required benefits was a taboo for the Sofia family. In fact, because of the loyalty source substance, the Sofia royal family's females had the right to refuse an engagement. Situations like Xia Luo's situation were very rare. It could only be said that the Sofia family had lost this fine tradition after hundreds of years of independent development. When they first met and discovered that Xia Luo was a super genius, Isha Bela should have cancelled her engagement and given her freedom. However, the identity of Luo Ya's little brother made her feel helpless. More importantly, although it wasn't obvious, Xia Luo seemed to be really moved. "Xia Luo, he's your future husband. What are you afraid of?" "No, actually, our engagement can be annulled. It's not about the engagement. Don't you like him?" Isabella's straightforward shot was as if she had ripped off Charlotte's concealment. The girl's eyes widened and her face turned as red as blood. I didn't, huh? You didn't?" The queen snorted at the brown-haired girl's feeble explanation. At the same time, she was angered by her hurried denial. She thought for a moment and stared into Xia Luo's eyes. "Well, since you said so, I'll give you 2 choices. If you like him, you can save him personally. This is a great opportunity. Originally, there was only an engagement, but you can rely on saving his life to truly connect with him and gain a deeper bond. If you don't like him, then leave. I'll use conventional methods to maintain his condition. No matter what, his life won't be in danger." Isha Bela's words stunned Xia Luo. Her gaze became conflicted and her body began to tremble. The queen sighed when she saw this. Suddenly, her heart softened. She looked at her younger sister and said earnestly, "Charlotte, our origin substances pretty much guarantee that we will be faithful to one person until the end of our lives. There are countless women in our clan who are too ashamed to pursue a relationship and end up in a tragic state. Do you want to follow in their footsteps? Think about your opponents. It's almost inevitable that other girls will appear around a boy like Luoya. If you don't have enough bonds with him before they take action, how do you plan to protect your family?" Isha Bela's last sentence was like a violent blow to the brown-haired girl's body. Xia Luo's eyes flashed with the shadows of two girls, one with blonde hair and the other with silver hair. In the end, her attention returned to the word family. Her confused gaze gradually became firm and her body gradually stopped trembling. "Fine, it's about time." Isha Bela secretly clenched her fists. Xia Luo also felt that she had made up her mind. "I understand, Sister Isha Bela." Chapter 166. A day later, in the dim cabin, the girl's voice trembled. Her words were full of embarrassment and helplessness. "Hey, don't move so much." "I'm sorry, I can't help it." "So, Mr. Luoya, can you explain why you used that spell? The ship was almost frozen by you." The girl's stern voice sounded. The black-haired boy who was shivering from the cold couldn't help but feel depressed. After holding it in for a long time, Luoya could only helplessly explain. "I just wanted to try it. I really didn't want to make it so big. I'm wrong." Forget it, I'm too lazy to blame you." Seeing Luoya's good attitude and shivering body, the red-haired girl's eyes flashed with sympathy. She stretched out her hand and snapped her fingers. The gemstones inlaid on the wall in the room immediately bloomed with brilliance. The light of the ruby shone on Luoya's body and accelerated his blood flow. Originally, this gemstone was used in the medical room to stop bleeding. Now, on Luoya's body, it was used in reverse to increase the heat. Next, the gemstones with several spells such as temperature increase, ice absorption, and so on lit up. In the dazzling light, Luoya's situation improved a lot. Under the illumination of so many operating lights, the chief surgeon finally came to the stage. Xia Luo stretched out her hand and put it on Luoya's shoulder. After the boy's trembling knees stabilized, she sat sideways. Her body gently leaned on the boy's chest, and her body began to emit a faint light. Golden Soul, this was the core item of the Sophia family, or the Highland Elf bloodline, to exert the power. Its essence was actually not gold, but a mixture of curses with gold components. In general, it could be hard or soft. The reason why the Golden Worship was called the Golden Worship was because there were these things flowing in the hull. They could strengthen the curse of the Highland Elf bloodline by several times or even dozens of times. The keel of the Golden Worship was made up of solidified golden souls, which could ensure that the ship would not fall apart no matter what happened. The rest of the acceleration, weight reduction, and cannons were handed over to the liquid circulation golden souls. The system formed by this could be said to be quite advanced. With this technology, the Sophia dynasty could even suppress the sea folk and become the overlord of the sea. Of course, there were pros and cons. The Golden Worship's weakness was that it had to be controlled by a bloodline holder of the family Sophia. Once the person was gone, the ship was basically useless. Just like the previous St. Paul, once the vice-captain died, the warship was paralyzed. Returning to being an ordinary ship was like a piece of meat in the eyes of the seafolk. However, these were only the functions of the Golden Worship. Usually, the Golden Soul was considered the Sophia family's protective curse vessel. The liquid metal-like material could block most attacks and was the best shield. Pure golden curses could also be separated from the Golden Soul, which had more uses. For example, the current contact enhancement. Luoya named it Omnipotent Muscle and Bone Pads. How do you feel? Are you feeling better? Yeah, it's not that cold anymore. Speaking of which, I feel like your skills are even better than yesterday. I'm also improving. Besides, if I don't learn well, Xia Luo recalled what happened yesterday and blushed. Luoya coughed awkwardly. His gaze wandered around and finally stopped at the young lady's red lips. Recalling the moment when he woke up from his deep sleep and their eyes met, Luo Ye felt a little dizzy. Supporting Xia Luo's slim waist, the black-haired young man couldn't help but feel a little restless. She was indescribably beautiful, pure, and adorable. She was kind-hearted and willing to sacrifice herself to save him. If they didn't meet so late, Luo Ye really suspected that he would marry Xia Luo for the rest of his life. Sighing at the young lady's charm, Luo Ye shook his head and looked at the system to see the reason for his current behavior. Touch of Frozen Earth. A skill transformed from part of the ancient, terrifying disaster ability. When the frozen earth descends, everything will return to calm. Release a directional freezing air to the surroundings. It can be attached to any form of attack or defense. The range and strength are determined by the user's curse power. Side effect, intermittent cold. Looking at the side effects, Roha sighed. He didn't think that one day he would become a boxer, and what he learned was the 7 damages fist. If you want to freeze someone, freeze yourself first. Master Yi, I've learned a lot. Shi Ye's world was realistic. Great power often came with a heavy price. In the past, Luo Ye could be said to have never touched this area until Touch of Frozen Earth taught him a lesson. This morning, the golden ship was caught by the sea folk. A huge sea monster with a group of scaly people stretched out its tentacles covered in mucus and wanted to wrap around the St. Mary. Luo Ye, who faced the threat of tentacles for the first time, didn't dare to hold back. He decisively used Touch of Frozen Earth. It was a freezing air flow wrapped in ice. When the ice mist swept across the sea like a dragon, not to mention the scaly people, sea monsters, and even the morning fog froze at that moment. This short encounter was quickly won by the humans, but for Luo Ye, it was a failure because he froze the sea monster's claws on the deck and couldn't remove them. This giant tentacle extended more than 20 meters out of the ship, and the other end was directly dragged in the sea like a tail. Chapter 167. For the next day, Luo Ye had a pretty good time. With Xia Luo as his milk bottle, Luo Ye became arrogant. Freezing air? 7 injuring fists? Since his moves were powerful, he had to find a strong opponent to hit. It didn't matter if he was injured. He could just find Xia Luo and let her train her control of the Golden Soul. It had to be said that hugging Xia Luo was very comfortable. The feeling of holding the girl's exquisite and luxurious body in his hands fully satisfied Luo Ye's possessiveness. Moreover, the big miss was very cute when she was shy. Luo Ye couldn't get enough of it every time. Of course, as a vigilant and responsible person, Luo Ye didn't do anything to Xia Luo. The reason why he repeatedly tormented Xia Luo was to familiarize himself with the skill. Frozen Earth Touch was a rare skill that came from Luo Ye's origin substance, crown. According to the system, Frozen Earth Maker was a mutated version of the crown stone. Although Luo Ye didn't understand the details, he was sure that this was a unique skill. Unlike the Gulan Dayer's strength, origin substance, and undying transformation, Frozen Earth Touch was a skill that belonged to Luo Ye. It could be practiced and grew. The more he used it, the more he could understand it and become more powerful. That's right, Luo Ye was leveling up because he was very uneasy. Originally, Luo Ye thought that with his interference, Egg's strength was damaged, and the Golden Fleet's flagship, the St. Mary, had greatly increased its speed. The fleet should be able to shake off the enemy and hold out for 2.5 days for him and Xia Luo to return safely. However, Isha Bela's words at noon made him feel very uneasy. The Silver Eagles haven't found Gordon and the others for 2 days in a row. Something's wrong. The Silver Eagle was a wide-area search curse vessel used on the Golden Warship to investigate the enemy's situation. It was inlaid with silver and gems, and its flying speed was far faster than ordinary birds by relying on curse power. Before this, Isha Bela and Gordon's fleet were monitoring each other, but since the arrival of Luo Ye and others, Gordon's fleet had disappeared. Obviously, Luo Ye and the others had changed the original strategy of both sides, making the future even more confusing. After learning that there was no news of the rebel fleet led by Gordon, Although Luo Ye didn't show any reaction on the surface, he was nervous and uneasy. He would feel uncomfortable if he didn't do anything. Increasing his strength, even if it was just a little, was Luo Ye's current idea, and he put it into practice. In Luo Ye's intensive familiarization and practice, the scaly people were turned into popsicles and sunk into the sea one by one. The instinct of the tentacle sea monsters made them start to stay away from Luo Ye, because they would lose if they fought with Luo Ye. The half-frozen octopus claw on the ship was a lesson learned. Obviously, the mollusks also had a desire to survive. After several rounds of confrontation, the enemies were scared away by the cold air. Luo Ye, who was bored, wanted to develop and expand his life function. He wanted to see if he could use it as a refrigerator, but he soon found out that it didn't work. The frozen Earthmaker's cold air was different from the normal cold air. There was no way to adjust the power at all. With just a light sweep, it could freeze the squid claw into an open hammer. The frozen items were particularly difficult to melt, and they still couldn't be thawed after a day. After the fifth hug with Milady in the evening and his waist was pinched, the black-haired boy also knew that he had gone too far. He could only gnaw on the octopus on the deck. However, what he didn't expect was that a guest came while he was enjoying the scenery. "Take this, the best white fruit wine." The words carried a hint of a smile. Luo Ye reached out and took the bottle of wine. He looked at the woman walking over and smiled. "Sister Isabella, I'm still a child. This wine is a bit strong." "Men's wine is always strong. Isn't it good to get used to it in advance?" "Men? But you drink it too." "Rulers have no gender." Isabella chuckled and took a sip from her bottle. She walked to Luo Ye's side and leaned against the railing to look at the night sea. At this time, dozens of ships were shining brightly on the surface of the sea. Vaguely, the singing of sailors could be heard. Luo Ye opened the bottle cap and took a sip of the wine. He couldn't help but grin at the spiciness. Isabella saw this and laughed. She snatched the white fruit wine and gave Luo Ye another bottle of beer. "Forget it, drink this. Beer is more compatible with the boy." Her Majesty said so with a smile. Luo Ye couldn't help but smile. He looked at the beautiful and handsome woman and suddenly felt a little envious of Vincent. Presumably, only his ancestors' excellent appearance, strength, and wonderful fate could win the favor of such a woman. Ordinary men would feel ashamed standing in front of her, let alone trying to court her. "Sister Isabella, why are you suddenly looking for me?" Luo Ye, who had become quite familiar with her over the past few days, asked softly as he tasted the new wine. The brown-haired woman smiled. After pondering for a while, she said, "Nothing. I just want to ask what you think of Xia Luo." "Xia Luo? Yes, I heard that although you two are engaged, you haven't known each other for long, so I want to hear your thoughts about her." Chapter 168. The next morning, Luo Ye was awakened by the sound of the alarm. When the black-haired teenager opened his eyes, the gemstones on the wall were glowing red under the effect of the curse. He was shocked and quickly got up. Although there were many gemstones on the golden warship, the ones that woke the crew up were not of this color. Red gemstones represented an alarm on the ship. When it lit up, it meant only one thing, and that was the appearance of the enemy. The sound of the crew's hurried footsteps and noises came from the corridor. Luo Ye got up, put on his coat and rushed out of the door. He saw Xia Luo, who also rushed out of the door. "Luo Ye, it's an enemy attack." The reddish-brown-haired girl frowned uneasily. Luo Ye's face did not change, but he could not help but sigh in his heart. After all the calculations, the danger could not be avoided. Witness countdown, 24 hours and 47 minutes. Looking at the countdown in the system, Luo Ye knew that there was no way to avoid it. With more than a day left, they would either win or lose in the sea battle. There was no way to delay it on land. Thinking of this, the teenager grabbed the girl's hand and rushed to the upper deck. Along the way, the two of them saw a group of people looking to the east. Luo Ye turned his head and saw a fleet emerging from the sea under the light of the rising sun. Without a doubt, the 6 light spots were the 6 disasters that Gordon and the others worshipped as the gods. As for the reason why the fleet suddenly caught up with the golden warship, Luoya also found out. The seafolk. Under the light of the rising sun, the strange-looking tentacle monsters in the sea were gradually sinking into the deep sea. They hated the strong light and would only appear on cloudy days. However, they were not interested in the warships that were within reach. Obviously, the sea monsters and the rebels led by Gordon were in cahoots. In order to take back the egg, they had joined hands with the sea folk and became the traitors of the human army. Gordon should not have the ability to communicate with the sea folk. Why would those fishes help him? If it's Gordon, it's indeed impossible. However, our enemy is not only them. Isha Bela looked at the enemy warships in the distance while surrounded by sailors. Her eyes were full of seriousness. I'm afraid it's a trick of the Saint Heroes Guild. Her Majesty said as she gave the order loudly. Dozens of warships began to set off amidst the sound of the broadcast. They gathered in formation and took up advantageous positions. Hundreds of silver eagles on the warships soared in the sky to observe the situation of the enemy. The detection under the water was also activated. In the distance, Gordon's fleet was also making an emergency turn. The captains were personally steering the ship, trying their best to keep it parallel to the Golden Fleet's warships, so as to avoid being shot to the bottom of the sea by the bow cannons. More than an hour had passed in the midst of their respective preparations. The distance between the two sides was getting closer and closer. In a situation where both sides were clear about each other's tactics, no one would take the initiative to become the target of the main cannons. Close-range shooting and boarding battle would become the main theme. The sailors on the mast readied their arrows, and the soldiers on the side of the ship held their shields. While both sides were tense, a light flashed on St. Mary's. It was a communication request from St. Martin, the flagship of the rebels. Isha Bela looked into the distance. Her gaze passed through the vast sea and landed on the white-haired old man at the bow of the flagship opposite her. She thought for a moment and finally turned on the device gently. It's been a long time, Isha Bela. An old voice rang out, greeting the brown-haired queen. It was also the first and last communication before the battle began. Isha Bela, you should know that our race inherited the bloodline of the Highland Elves. Our bloodline gave us glory, and the source of our power, loyalty, was the source of our power. Mother Goddess was the great existence that our ancestors were loyal to in the past. It was the time when our race was at its most prosperous. Only by regaining the faith of the past can we regain the glory of the past. Gordon Sophia's old face flushed red. He looked forward and shouted under the gaze of tens of thousands of people on dozens of warships. For thousands of years, the prosperous times have become a thing of the past. Destruction is unavoidable like fate. The power of Mother Goddess and the oracles is far from what we can contend against. Compared to them, humans are like eggs. Rely on the strong, obey fate, and regain loyalty. This is the way for us to survive. The old man said as he looked up at the sky. His eyes were filled with reverence. The sea was silent. The sailors looked at each other. The loyalty, source, and the cruel reality made them cower. If it was justifiable, and if they were powerless to resist, then it seemed that it was only right to stand on the side of the strong. Gordon's words undoubtedly shook the will of the warriors. Amidst the clamor of the crowd, Isha Bela looked determined. She stepped forward and stood at the highest point of the warship, looking at the end of the waves. Gordon, don't play such tricks anymore. Perhaps our ancestors were loyal to Mother Goddess, but don't forget that before that, all intelligent races were children of Shia. If regaining the faith of the past can make us stronger, then it can only be the primordial goddess. As for the fate of destruction, don't make me laugh my head off. For thousands of years, the masters of the world have changed many times, but the civilization is still the same. Where is the invincible Mother Goddess that you speak of now? Who is controlling one of the 6 disasters? Humans may not be strong enough yet, but fate is far from over. What right do you have to talk about the future of humans when you've already prostrated yourself on the ground? Isha Bela looked back and looked at her subordinates on the dozens of warships behind her. It was as if she could see the history of the birth of this huge fleet. Do you think we don't know how strong the enemy is? No, we don't. We also know that this mission is extremely dangerous. However, as the most powerful maritime group of the current human civilization and the army that has preserved the best technology, we represent the civilization itself. At this critical moment when the human world in the north is in danger, we are the last defenders of the entire civilization. When our descendants look back on history thousands of years later, they will be proud of our courage. Chapter 169. In the control room, Xia Luo looked at the vice-captain, who was nervously observing the situation nearby. She gently opened the door and walked into the ship. As she walked down the stairs, she looked at the colorful gem in her hand silently. The tremors of the ship made her feet slightly numb. The roars of the soldiers could be heard even in the cabin. However, these noises did not make Xia Luo excited. On the contrary, it made her feel very depressed. As the eldest daughter of Sorophia, although Xia Luo had not experienced much bloodshed since she was young, she was not a weak princess. Her powerful, extraordinary strength and talent meant that her life would not be peaceful since she was born. However, even so, this battle was still unbearable for her. She was even secretly sad, because this was a civil war. Unlike the terrifying scaly monsters that Luoya fought against before, both sides of this battle were humans. They were even Xia Luo's ancestors. Although the girl firmly supported Isabela, even if she won, Xia Luo would not be too happy. Because in the end, both sides would consume the strength of the humans. The Highland Elves would be greatly weakened in this civil war. Isabela was very clear about Xia Luo's thoughts. It was better to say that all the people of Sorophia hated this war from the bottom of their hearts. That was why the queen did not let Xia Luo, a girl with extraordinary talent who stayed away from the internal strife of Sorophia, fight on the battlefield. She did not want Xia Luo's hands to be stained with the blood of her own people. Putting the colorful gem that could form an absolute defense in a critical moment into her pocket, Xia Luo strolled towards the egg. The mission that Isabela gave her was to wait here. Although it was unlikely if the Golden Fleet lost, then Xia Luo would activate the Eternal Seal plan and bury the egg of disaster in the depths of the sea forever. Stepping on the frozen ground, Xia Luo suddenly missed the days when she and Luoya were in the study of Akat Hill every day. Although those days were boring and there was no progress, now that she thought about it, she felt very fulfilled. Every morning, Xia Luo would start with a cup of scented tea personally brewed by the young man. She would read the information carefully, eat breakfast under his reminder, and argue noisily about salty and sweet. Although they would occasionally quarrel, Xia Luo was already somewhat used to it. Sometimes she even found it quite interesting. After confiscating his potions, he would definitely feel sleepy in the afternoon. As expected, he should take an afternoon nap. No, he probably didn't need it anymore. At this thought, Xia Luo stopped in her tracks. She looked around and couldn't help but lower her eyes. Indeed, there was no need. Luoya and Xia Luo. Although the two of them were connected by marriage, in reality, the reason they were together was because of Xia Luo's employment. The clues of the Sophia dynasty and the lost technology were Xia Luo's original goals. But now, this goal had obviously been achieved, and even exceeded. At the same time, the relationship between Luoya and Xia Luo was also coming to an end. The goal of cooperation had been achieved, and the annulment of the marriage had been agreed upon. Next, it was time to end the song and disperse. From now on, their lives would return to their original paths. Luoya didn't need to brew tea anymore. He would once again become the young and promising feudal lord. Xia Luo wouldn't complain about the sweetness of the dishes because she didn't need to worry about the other person at the dining table. Their own brilliance and no longer interacted with each other. This was their ending. Xia Luo lowered her head and stared blankly at the ice and snow in front of her. Suddenly, she realized something strange. She didn't feel any joy. No matter if it was getting rid of the marriage or obtaining the lost technology and bloodline curse of the Sophia dynasty, she didn't feel anything in her heart. Instead, she felt miserable for some reason. He would probably return to the days when he was in love with those girls. The girl couldn't help but feel a lump in her throat. After thinking for a long time, she could only force a smile. There's nothing I can do. In his heart, I'm probably just an annoying employer, Xia Luo muttered to herself. She couldn't help but feel that her mood was very strange. However, the self-pitying girl didn't notice that while she was lost in her thoughts, a humanoid figure had silently stood up behind her. His body was made of liquid, and most of his facial features were missing. Only his terrifying mouth full of jagged teeth cracked open as if he was silently mocking her. If we can still be together, no, you can't go anywhere. Ha! A hoarse and ear-piercing reply came from beside her ear. Xia Luo's eyes widened and she suddenly turned around. Sharp claws made of liquid pierced towards the girl's neck. Xia Luo's protective pendant that sensed danger suddenly released a burst of light. But what the girl didn't expect was that the barrier that could stop a high-level extraordinaire was actually shattered by the sharp claws. At this critical moment, Xia Luo held the rainbow gem and wanted to build another defense, but it was all too late. Under the girl's desperate gaze, the sharp claws made of liquid came head-on. With the sound of a blade piercing into flesh, blood and flesh splattered. Crimson blood flowed down Xia Luo's cheeks. The warm feeling brought with it the warmth of its owner. The girl widened her eyes and stared at the boy who suddenly descended from the sky and protected her in his arms. Her brain was numb and couldn't function. Hey, are you okay? I'm fine, a low voice sounded beside her ear. Xia Luo responded blankly. She looked at the familiar boy. Her body trembled as she lowered her head to look at the wound on his chest. At the same time, a hoarse and ear-piercing voice sounded. Chapter 170. In the cabin, the man and woman who had just escaped from danger hugged each other. Facing Luo Ye's decision to kill them, Xia Luo, who had experienced the terror of the enemy, felt uneasy. It's the sea outside, it's the liquid monster's home ground. I'm not going, it's his home ground. If I go, it won't be. But he can hide in the Golden Soul, it's obvious that he's here to kill you and Isha Bela. He must die, the only one who can kill him is me. Luo Ye held the girl's face with both hands, looking straight at Xia Luo's trembling pupils. His emotions were affected by his ability as cold as ice, but his words were full of gentleness. Wait for me here, be good. The girl blushed and nodded under Luo Ye's gaze. She activated the gem in her hand to open the barrier, and at the same time, Luo Ye's figure disappeared in the dancing snowflakes. Under the deliberate actions of both sides, the battle between the Golden Fleet and the Rebel Fleet had entered a white-hot state. The sound of the dead and injured sailors falling into the sea continued, and the bodies of the soldiers fighting fiercely in the water floated on the surface of the sea with puffs of blood. The chaotic battlefield and the sea environment should have allowed the liquid monster to be like a fish in water, but at this time, it had completely lost its usual confidence and leisure. Because it was facing a pursuit. Frost and cold, those were the most difficult things for the liquid monster to fight against, but now, it was being targeted by an opponent who completely restrained it. It didn't know what mistake it made, but there was no doubt that even in the sea, Luo Ye could accurately capture its location. The black-haired boy was like a soul chaser in the story in the eyes of the liquid monster. Everything about him was so strange, whether it was the sudden increase in strength, the fact that it didn't know why it could see its eyes, or the terrifying frost, all made it uneasy. But it probably didn't expect that in Luo Ye's eyes, these were actually very simple and clear. Liquid life puppet, Daoj Leisai Roderick. This was the liquid monster in Luo Ye's eyes. When Daoj Leisai drove the liquid puppet to board the ship under the disguise of the waves, that bloody disaster skill was activated. Luo Ye saw the monster enter the cabin through the deck. Knowing that Xia Luo might be the target, the boy made a prompt decision and killed his way in. Facts proved that Luo Ye was too impulsive, even with the skeleton giant's skeleton blocking him. The huge difference in strength still made Luo Ye had a trip to the gates of hell, but that was all in the past. Pei Tila's blessing, this skill that could only be used once, was far more powerful than Luo Ye imagined. Although the time was limited, it was able to raise Luo Ye's source rank to source rank 3. and with a high extraordinary rank as the foundation, Luo Ya's ability really blossomed, showing off its extraordinary power. The boy's body flashed in the air like a cannonball, and in a few seconds he had already caught up with the assassin in the sea. His body smashed into the sea, and before his toes touched the sea, the cold air had already created a pure white foothold for him to land on. But this wasn't enough. Frozen earth. In an indifferent and cold whisper, the source substance of the crown bloomed with a disaster of ice and snow. In the middle of the sea surrounded by the ship, a white area suddenly began to corrode. That was the blessing of eternal frost, the death god's lament. Touch of frozen earth, under the support of Luo Ya's source rank, was no longer the same as before. Waves of frost gushed out like a volcano, spreading out like a huge wave, majestically spreading out in all directions. As a result, the waves became fixed, the waves became still, the seabirds in the sky silently fell, and everything returned to silence. Freezing the sea, this was a miraculous act that shocked everyone on the battlefield. The sound of cannons on the warships became clear at this moment, and the archers who had a good view shouted in disbelief. The soldiers on the deck also lost their heads out of fear, and the divers in the sea stopped fighting and scattered in all directions, beginning to flee for their lives. Realizing that something was wrong, the captains shouted loudly to change the rudder, but the enemy ships that were close to them were already frozen in the sea. Frost climbed up the hull of the ship, and the sailors who jumped off the ship had already turned into ice sculptures in midair. When they fell to the ground, they shattered into blood-red ice cubes. This terrifying scene caused the people on the warships to shrink into a ball. Deoj Leisai, I know you are here. Above the frozen sea, the black-haired young man looked at his feet with an indifferent expression. He opened his mouth and calmly spoke the details of the enemy. Puppeteer, or puppet school, is that how you are called? Luo Ya recalled the many schools in Bulonia, the country of scholars, in his mind, and filtered out the most likely name. Puppet school was a school that did not aim at one's own combat power, but to control all kinds of puppets to fight on behalf of the user. It advocated that the human body had limits, but the puppets controlled could be ever-changing. The appearance, shape, attribute, and nature could be changed according to the enemy. Even after costly rituals, the puppets could have special functions, such as the first attack that launched the attack had a special attack on the protective cursed item. However, as the saying went, there were pros and cons. Although the puppet school's puppets were extremely flexible, the puppeteer himself had no combat power. He could hardly move effectively in the process of controlling the puppets, and the source rank of the puppets could not be higher than the puppeteer himself. Chapter 171. Countdown, 40, 39, 38. In the cabin that was gradually turning cold, the black-haired youth calmly looked at the white-robed youth whose arm had been petrified. Deoj Leisai's body was trembling at this time. He stared at Luo Ya, unable to figure out why he would appear here. No, impossible. How did you find me? You and I looked at each other, right? How does your arm feel? Luo Ya answered the last question of the dying man in front of him indifferently. Deoj Leisai's face turned pale when he heard this. He glanced at his petrified arm. He did not expect that this small remnant of the curse power could make Luo Ya follow him all the way here. Wait, I'm a director of the Saint Heroes Society, and I have a very high position in the sect. You are Luo Ya, right? Tell me what you want, and I can satisfy you. Deoj Leisai's white eyes gradually regained their color. He squeezed out an ugly smile on his face and quickly explained his position. However, the black-haired youth's face did not change at all. Don't waste your energy. What you said is not important to me. Then what's important? You can tell me. Not you, it's very important to me. Luo Ya glared at the enemy who had come to kill Xia Luot, and the cold air on his body surged like a dragon. Deoj Leisai's face changed dramatically when he heard this. In the next moment, the puppet master's body suddenly burst into a bloody mist as he made his final struggle. Flesh decomposition. This was Deoj Leisai's last life-saving move. His body would become a bomb of curse power and explode violently. his body could be decomposed into thousands of pieces under the control of his mind. As long as one piece could escape, Deoj Lasai would have a chance to survive. Of course, the price of this was the loss of vital organs and functions for the rest of his life. He would live like a ghost, but this was nothing compared to death. After all, as long as he was alive, many things could be recovered little by little in this world where extraordinary power existed. After knowing that Luoya would not let him go, the puppet master's curse power was very decisive. In an instant, a violent explosion occurred in the narrow space of the spaceship, and a huge wave of curse power lifted everything into the sky. It was a bomb made by a source level 2 extraordinary with all his remaining curse power. When the bomb exploded, the violent fluctuation of curse power could be felt clearly even thousands of miles away. The spaceship Deoj Lasai was blown into two by the terrifying explosion. The bloody sailors and the broken deck rolled into the sea together, and the billowing smoke blocked the view. The puppet master's remaining consciousness could not help but feel a little relieved after the explosion. With such a powerful attack in such a small area, even if Luoya did not die, he should not be able to chase after him. The ability to freeze the sea looked terrible, but Deoj Lasai did not pay much attention to it. High-level extraordinary had many similar bloodline abilities that could do this, but even a source level 2 frost bloodline could not stop Deoj Lasai in his current state. After flesh decomposition, his curse power resistance would be ridiculously strong, which was why this skill could be used as a life-saving skill. Whether it was the great scholar of Bologna or the angel king of St. Mestre, no one could stop Deoj Lasai in this state. As long as he survived, he would have a chance to return to his peak at such a young age. When the time came, he must kill this damn little bastard's whole family. The puppet master smashed into the sea with a firm belief. At the same time, the frozen energy on Luoya's body exploded again. Deoj Lasai laughed in his heart when he saw this. It was just a source level 3 frost skill. How could it trap him? The confident puppet master's decomposed body swooped into the sea from the air and rushed into the fog like rain. However, what happened next was the opposite of what he thought, and he could not even understand it. He was still frozen. At this moment, countless questions floated in the young man's heart, but soon he found the reason. Wait, the source of this freezing energy is... How could it be? Deoj Lasai fled in horror, but it was too late. In just a few seconds, whether it was his body or his mind, the existence named Deoj Lasai had stopped functioning. You've become such a trash. You really saved me a lot of time. The black-haired young man stood on the sea and looked indifferently at the thousands of pieces of flesh falling and shattering. He shook his head in puzzlement in the rain of frozen flesh. Speaking of which, why does it feel like this escape skill is completely useless? Puzzled questions arose in the young man's heart, but he quickly threw them to the back of his mind. He could feel that Deoj Lasai's soul had completely returned to the underworld. Farewell, Mr. Deoj Lasai. The familiar ship, the familiar deck. When these were reflected in Luoya's eyes, the young man knew that he had arrived at his destination. On the deck of the St. Mary's, Luoya, who had returned from afar, stood quietly, panting. The surroundings were already covered in frost. In the last half a minute of the Paitila's blessing skill, Luoya made full use of his remaining energy. He did not return from the enemy's camp calmly, but instead he greeted the enemy warmly. Chapter 172. Something's coming. This thought suddenly appeared in Luoya's mind, but he was able to confirm it almost immediately. It was a vague feeling, but it was also a pressure that couldn't be ignored. It trembled like a piece of ice suddenly pressed against the back of one's neck in the middle of a hot summer day. The pressure was also like the gloomy wind howling under the rolling dark clouds in the sky. Luoya's blurred consciousness quickly sobered up under this mysterious feeling. His golden pupils shrank, and the arm that was hugging Xia Luo tightened, startling the girl. Luoya? What's wrong? Are you in pain anywhere? The reddish-brown-haired girl wiped away her tears and asked anxiously. However, Luoya didn't know how to answer. He leaned on the girl's body in confusion and looked towards the horizon. Suddenly, he realized that the golden sun had disappeared at the limit of his vision. In the direction where the rising sun should have been, a black spot was expanding in the golden sunlight. It was like smoke, but also like a creeping darkness. Under Luo Ya's shocked gaze, the strange black thing swallowed everything. The light of the sun was covered, and everyone on the enemy's warship realized that something was wrong. "Hey, what's that in the east? It's black. What's that?" The sailors on the tall poles shouted to report the abnormality. The soldiers around Luo Ya frowned. Their long years of combat intuition told them that something was wrong. Xia Luo stopped wiping Luo Ya's sweat and followed Luo Ya's gaze to the east. The actions of the crowd caused a chain reaction. More and more people stopped what they were doing and looked towards the east. The gradually darkening sky caused the warships in the battle to automatically turn on their lights. The sound of cannon fire gradually stopped, and the people in the boarding battle began to split into two sides and look around vigilantly. "What's that? Speak." Above the sea, Isha Bela roared angrily as she pressed the gem trigger against Gordon's head. However, the old man's consciousness was already hazy. His blurred eyes looked towards the dark sky, and his face was filled with fear and worship for the gods. "That's why I said before, Isha Bela, don't try to resist. That will only lead to death. He has always been following behind us and obeying the Mother Goddess. That is our destiny. God's punishment will cleanse all traitors." Bang! In the midst of the sound of the trigger being pulled, the head of the fanatical believer shattered into pieces. Isabella looked indifferently at the dismembered corpse in front of her that sank into the sea, her tone cold. "Even if you're the leader of the rebels, you're still a king. You can bow to your so-called God as a believer, but before that, every king has to consider their people first." The brown-haired queen looked up ahead. The darkness that covered the sky was rushing over from the distant horizon. The sky was blurry and the sea was no longer clear. Isha Bela vaguely understood what it was. It was the destroyer of civilization, the calamity of all living beings, the Lord of Terror that was once classified as a calamity by the ancient civilization. Its name was Mr. Darkness. That was the name given to it by the ancient Ents that it destroyed. It was one of the 6 calamities, of the same standard as the object that this huge fleet was escorting. However, unlike the frozen earth creator that was still and unique, Mr. Darkness was a truly matured and terrifying calamity. It was a mythical monster that was born from the combination of fire and earth. The darkness that drowned everything was not some kind of cursed power, but it was far more terrifying than that. It was dust, sand, and dust. It was the fog of death that would only be born from volcanic activity that shook the earth. The moving earth and the breathing of volcanoes were the true form of Mr. Darkness. It was also the reason why it was almost impossible to resist. It did not need to attack. It only needed to pass by, and what was left behind was death and silence. It was obvious that no one in the area could survive the attack of such a monster. Gordon's subservience and loyalty were of no use. His subordinates could only die. How foolish! Since ancient times, so many civilizations have been destroyed by them. How could there not be people who compromised? The people who resisted might not be around anymore, but how many of the people who obeyed them are still alive? The reason why the Highland Elves were able to continue their bloodline is not because of the Mother Goddess or these detestable monsters. It is because of the bloodline of the humans that you belittled. Isha Bela muttered to herself as she gazed at the approaching enemies in the distance. Since ancient times, most of the traitors who betrayed their own race did not have a good ending, let alone betraying their entire race. Under the oppressive sky, the queen gazed at the approaching calamity. She recalled the guesses of the Sage Guild. "I didn't expect to be targeted by these fellows. It seems that the scholars' guesses were correct. These fellows really do possess intelligence." Isha Bela chuckled helplessly before the waves of destruction. But after that, her face revealed a calm and resolute expression. Perhaps this is the so-called fate. But even if the scales of fate have been fixed, I, Isha Bela, will never bow down. Golden curses surged into the sky around the rare heroine. The communication between the ships immediately echoed in the sky above the entire sea. "Brave warriors! There is no need to panic now that things have come to this. Just as I said before, the calamity of chaos has caught up with us. The footsteps of destruction are approaching our civilization. Gordon's illusions have been shattered. The ancient monster's targets are all humans here, regardless of friend or foe. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.